They say a queen dies twice. First, when her husband slips poison into her wine. Second, when she realizes the man she saved from assassination plots and battlefield losses has been planning her murder for months. Queen Seraphina Vale learned both lessons on the same godforsaken night, standing outside the royal chambers while her husband and his mistress laughed about which toxin would make her death look most natural. Some women beg, some women break. Seraphina did neither. She became something far more dangerous than a murdered wife. She became a ghost with a plan. Stick around till the end of this story, hit that like button, and drop your city in the comments so I know my tribe is watching. You're going to want to see how a dead queen destroys a living king. The storm came in hard the night Seraphina decided to stop being anyone's fool. Rain hammered the palace windows like fists demanding entry. Thunder rolled across the empire's capital with the kind of violence that made servants whisper about omens and angry gods. Inside the East Wing corridor, Queen Seraphina Vale stood motionless in the shadows, her silk nightgown plastered to her skin from where she'd walked through the downpour in the courtyard. Her dark hair hung in heavy ropes down her back. Water dripped onto ancient stone floors that had witnessed 3 centuries of royal bloodshed. She wasn't supposed to be here. She was supposed to be sleeping in her chambers on the opposite side of the palace, sedated by the herbal tea her lady-in-waiting brought every evening at 9. The same lady-in-waiting who'd served her faithfully for 7 years. The same woman who was probably on someone's payroll now. Trust was a currency Seraphina no longer possessed. Through the crack in the doorway ahead, golden lamplight spilled into the hallway. Voices drifted out. One she knew as well as her own heartbeat. King Lucien Arden, her husband of 12 years, sovereign of the Valdrin Empire, the man she'd stood beside through 2 assassination attempts and a civil war that nearly tore the kingdom apart. The other voice was honey and venom mixed. Lady Celeste Morcant. Seraphina pressed herself against the cold stone wall and listened. "You're certain the dosage won't be traceable?" Celeste's voice carried that musical lilt she used when manipulating court officials. Seraphina had watched her wield it like a blade for months now, slicing through loyalties and reputations. "The physician swears it'll look like heart failure." Lucien sounded tired. Not conflicted, not guilty, just tired. Seraphina's been under immense stress. The council's infighting, the northern rebellions, no one will question it. Seraphina's breath caught. Her hand found the wall to steady herself. The stone felt solid, real. Everything else seemed to be dissolving. "And if they do," Celeste pressed, "then we adjust the narrative." Lucien's footsteps moved across the room. "She's been acting erratic lately, paranoid. There are witnesses who'll testify to that." Because you made sure there would be, Seraphina thought. All those times he'd dismissed her concerns about Celeste in front of the council. All those moments he'd called her jealous, irrational, exhausting. "When?" Celeste asked. 3 days. During the anniversary banquet, she always drinks the ceremonial wine, 1 vial in the decanter. She'll make it through the toasts, retire early with what everyone assumes is a headache. By morning, the kingdom mourns its beloved queen. Beloved. The word was ash in Seraphina's mouth. "And then?" Celeste's voice shifted lower, intimate. "Then you finally make me your queen." "Then I make you my queen," Lucien confirmed. "The council won't oppose it, not after a respectful mourning period. You've cultivated enough support." Seraphina heard the sound of movement, fabric rustling, the soft noise that meant Celeste had moved closer to him. She didn't need to see to know what was happening. She'd known about the affair for 8 months, had gathered evidence, had planned to confront Lucien privately, to salvage what remained of their marriage for the sake of the Empire's stability. What a stupid, naive plan that had been. "I do love you, you know," Celeste murmured. "Not for the crown. For you, liar," Seraphina thought. Celeste Morcant loved power the way drunkards loved wine. Everything else was performance. "I know," Lucien said softly. "I should have married you from the start." Seraphina was always too rigid, too bound by duty. "You understand ambition. You understand what it takes to rule. Too bound by duty." Seraphina's fingernails bit into her palms. She'd led troops when Lucian was recovering from a poisoned blade wound. She'd negotiated peace treaties while pregnant and bleeding from a miscarriage the court physicians said would kill her. She'd taken an arrow meant for him during the Blackwood Rebellion and still managed to give the order that saved his life before she collapsed. Too bound by duty, she turned from the doorway. Her bare feet made no sound on the stone. Water still dripped from her hair, leaving a trail behind her like breadcrumbs in a fairy tale. But this wasn't a story where the heroine got rescued. This was the story where the heroine rescued herself. The walk back to her chambers took 7 minutes. 7 minutes for her mind to shift from the woman who'd believed in loyalty and love to something colder, sharper. Her private study was dark when she entered. She didn't light the lamps. In the shadows, she moved to the hidden panel behind the bookshelf, the one only she knew about. Her fingers found the catch. The panel swung open to reveal a small safe containing the documents she'd been collecting. Evidence of Celeste's manipulations. Letters proving she'd been embezzling crown funds. Testimony from servants who'd witnessed her ordering the death of a minor lord who'd refused to support her political maneuvers. Serafina had planned to use these to exile Celeste, to remove the cancer from court without causing a scandal that would weaken the throne. How quaint that plan seemed now. She pulled out the documents and spread them across her desk. Then she added her own journals. 12 years of notes. Records of every decision, every battle, every sacrifice. Proof that she'd been the spine holding this empire upright while Lucian played at being king. But proof wouldn't save her. Proof just made her dangerous. Her hands were steady as she began writing. Not a plea, not an accusation, instructions. When she finished, she sealed the letter and tucked it inside her sleeve. Then she changed out of her wet nightgown into traveling clothes. Dark wool, practical boots, a hooded cloak that had seen better days, the kind of outfit a queen would never wear. The palace had 17 secret exits. Serafina knew everyone. She'd mapped them herself during the Civil War when evacuation plans became necessary. Now that paranoia was saving her life. She took the passage that led through the wine cellars. The air smelled of oak and fermentation. Her footsteps echoed too loud in the narrow stone tunnel. Somewhere above, the palace continued its nightly routines. Servants preparing for morning, guards changing shifts. Lucian probably still in Celeste's chambers, planning the death of his inconvenient wife. The tunnel ended in a drainage grate that opened onto the cliffs below the palace. Rain still hammered down. The storm showed no signs of breaking. Perfect. Serafina had arranged for a carriage to be waiting at the base of the cliff road. The driver was a man who owed her a blood debt from the war. He didn't ask questions when she climbed inside, soaked and shaking. "The Western Bridge," she said, "fast as the horses can manage." He nodded and cracked the reins. The carriage lurched forward. Through the rain-streaked window, Serafina watched the palace lights grow distant. Somewhere in that fortress of stone and lies, Lucian was sleeping soundly next to his mistress, planning a funeral, practicing his grief face. The Western Bridge spanned the Ashfall River at its widest point, 300 feet of ancient stone over churning black water. In this weather, with this current, anything that went over the edge wouldn't surface for miles, if it surfaced at all. "Stop here," Serafina said when they reached the bridge's center. The driver pulled the horses to a halt. Rain pounded the carriage roof like drum beats. Thunder cracked so close Serafina felt it in her chest. She stepped out into the storm. The wind tried to rip her cloak away. She moved to the stone railing and looked down at the violent water below. A death here would be assumed, a carriage accident during a storm. The beloved queen, overcome with stress, taking a midnight ride to clear her head. Tragic, unavoidable. They'd search for a body. They wouldn't find one. Serafina pulled the sealed letter from her cloak and handed it to the driver. "Get this to General Marcus Thorne, no one else. Tell him the queen commanded it with her dying breath if you have to. He'll know what to do." The driver's weathered face showed no emotion. "What about you, Your Majesty?" "The queen dies tonight," Serafina said. "Make sure everyone knows it." She didn't wait for his response. She turned back to the carriage, grabbed the lantern from its hook, and hurled it hard against the wooden side. Oil splashed. Fire caught instantly despite the rain, protected by the carriage's overhang. The horses screamed and bolted. The driver struggled with the reins as the burning carriage lurched forward. Serafina was already moving, climbing over the stone railing. The river raged below. The drop would kill most people. Most people hadn't grown up swimming in northern waters cold enough to stop your heart. Most people weren't angry enough to survive anything. Serafina jumped. The impact knocked the air from her lungs. Black water closed over her head. The current grabbed her and pulled her under, spinning her until she lost all sense of direction. Her lungs burned. Her body screamed for air. She kicked hard and broke the surface. Gasped, went under again. Behind her, she heard the crack of wood. The driver had managed to send the burning carriage over the bridge edge. It hit the water with a crash that echoed across the gorge. Fire hissed and died. Pieces of flaming debris floated on the surface. Serafina let the current carry her downstream. She didn't fight it. Fighting would exhaust her. Instead, she angled her body toward the southern bank where the river widened and calmed. Her arms felt like lead. Her dress tried to drag her down. She thought about Lucien, about the way he'd looked at her on their wedding day, young, nervous, promising forever. She thought about the first time he'd called her his strength, his anchor. She thought about the night she'd taken that arrow for him, the way he'd held her hand while the physicians dug the barbed point from her shoulder, the tears in his eyes when he'd sworn he'd never let anything hurt her again. All of it lies. Or worse, all of it true once, and now dead. Her hand struck something solid, a fallen tree trunk wedged between rocks. She grabbed it and pulled herself close, coughing water from her lungs. Her whole body shook with cold. The southern bank was 20 feet away. She could make it. She had to make it. When her feet finally found muddy ground, she crawled out of the water and collapsed in the reeds. Rain continued to pour. Somewhere in the distance, she heard shouts. Search parties would be mobilizing already. The burning carriage would have been seen from the palace walls. Let them search. Let them find debris and assume the worst. Let Lucien grieve publicly while celebrating privately. Serafina forced herself to stand. Her legs trembled. Her clothes weighed 100 pounds. She stripped off the outer layers and left them in the mud. Underneath, she wore a simple shift. It would have to do. 3 miles south, there was a safe house, a place she'd established during the war and never told anyone about. Not even Lucien, especially not Lucien. She started walking. By the time dawn broke gray and cold over the empire, Queen Serafina Vale was officially dead. The burning carriage, the bridge, the storm. Guards found pieces of her cloak caught on rocks downstream. The river had claimed another victim. The kingdom would mourn. By the time dawn broke, the woman who'd been Serafina was 7 miles from the capital, standing in the doorway of a stone cottage that smelled of dust and old secrets. Inside, there was a locked chest containing money, documents, and everything she'd need to become someone else. She didn't cry. Crying was for people who still believed in something worth saving. Instead, she sat at the small wooden table and began to plan. Not revenge. Revenge was emotional, childish. Revenge was what Celeste would expect if she ever suspected the truth. No. This was something purer. This was justice. This was burning down everything Lucien had built on the foundation of her sacrifice and watching him choke on the ashes. 3 months, she decided. 3 months to become someone new, to build a network, to gather every piece of evidence that would destroy him. 3 months, and then Serafina Vale would return from the dead, not as a queen begging for her throne back, as a reckoning. Yet, the funeral was everything Lucien could have hoped for. Thousands lined the streets of the capital, weeping for their fallen queen. Merchants closed their shops. Soldiers stood at attention with black ribbons tied to their armor. The great cathedral overflowed with nobility dressed in mourning clothes. Lucien stood at the front in his formal blacks, his face a perfect mask of devastation. Beside him, Celeste wore deep purple, the color of mourning for non-family members. She kept her expression solemn, appropriately grief-stricken for the loss of her dear friend the Queen. They'd practiced their faces in the mirror. General Marcus Thorne stood 3 rows back, his jaw tight. He'd been one of Serafina's most loyal supporters, a grizzled war hero who'd fought beside her during the Blackwood Rebellion. Now he watched the empty casket with hollow eyes. The casket was empty because they'd never recovered a body, just pieces, just enough to confirm the tragedy. The High Minister droned through the ceremony, words about duty and sacrifice, about a queen who'd given everything for her people. Lucien let the words wash over him. He was thinking about the council meeting scheduled for next week, about how to position Celeste as his new advisor, about the timeline for their marriage. 6 months mourning. That was respectable. Then a quiet ceremony, nothing ostentatious. The kingdom would understand, a king needed a queen, the empire needed stability. Everything was falling into place. After the ceremony, Marcus Thorne approached. His dress uniform was immaculate. His eyes were cold. "Your Majesty," he said. "A word?" Lucian nodded and followed him to a private alcove off the cathedral's main hall. Through the stained glass windows, colored light painted the floor in fragments. "I received something," Marcus said quietly, "the night the Queen died. A letter." Lucien's expression didn't change. "From whom?" "From her." Marcus pulled a sealed envelope from his jacket. The royal seal was unbroken. "She must have sent it before the accident. I've been debating whether to open it, whether it's appropriate." Every muscle in Lucian's body tensed. "What does it say?" "I don't know yet. I wanted you to be present when I read it, as her husband, as her king." Marcus met his eyes. "Unless you'd prefer I keep it private?" Lucian's mind raced. Serafina couldn't have known. She'd been unconscious from the sedative tea. She'd had no warning, no time to prepare. Unless she had. "Open it," Lucian said. His voice came out steady. "If my wife left final words, they should be heard." Marcus broke the seal, unfolded the paper. His eyes scanned the contents. His expression shifted from neutral to stone. When he looked up, something dangerous lived in his gaze. "She asked that I look after her personal affairs," Marcus said slowly. "Her charitable foundations, her veterans fund. She's left very specific instructions about how the money should be distributed." "Of course," Lucian said. Relief made him almost dizzy. "We'll honor every wish." "She also mentions concerns." Marcus folded the letter carefully. "About corruption in the royal council, about funds being misappropriated. She'd been investigating something before her death." Lucien's relief evaporated. "Investigating?" "She doesn't provide details, just asks that I continue her work, that I trust no one." Marcus tucked the letter back into his jacket. "Did she mention any of this to you, Your Majesty?" "Serafina was under tremendous stress," Lucien said carefully. "She saw conspiracies everywhere toward the end. I tried to convince her to rest, but she wouldn't listen. The physicians said she was on the verge of collapse. Convenient that she died before she could expose whatever she'd found." Marcus's tone was flat, unreadable. "General, are you implying something?" "I'm implying the Queen was many things, but paranoid wasn't one of them." Marcus stepped closer, dropped his voice. "If she was investigating corruption, she had reason. And if she died before she could reveal it, someone benefited from that timing. That's a dangerous accusation." "I'm not accusing anyone, yet." Marcus held his gaze. "But I will continue her work, as she asked. And if I find evidence that her death wasn't an accident, if I find proof that someone wanted her silenced, then God help whoever is responsible. Because I won't." He turned and walked away. His boots echoed on the marble floor. Lucien stood alone in the alcove, his heart hammering. Serafina had known something, had suspected something, had been planning, but she was dead. The body was gone. Whatever evidence she'd gathered burned in that carriage or washed away in the river. He was safe. He had to be. 3 months later, a woman named Evelyn Duval arrived in the capital. She came with letters of introduction from a northern duchy, minor nobility. Wealthy enough to matter, obscure enough not to draw excessive scrutiny. Her credentials were impeccable, her references glowing. She'd spent the last decade managing her family's estates after her elderly parents passed. Now she sought to establish herself in the capital's social circles. She was beautiful in a way that didn't threaten, elegant without being memorable. Her dark hair was styled differently than it had been. Her eyes were the same shade but looked different somehow. Harder. She wore colors the Queen had never favored, moved with a confidence that seemed learned rather than born. No one recognized her. Why would they? Queen Serafina Vale was dead. Eveline took rooms in a fashionable district, hired a small staff, began accepting invitations to salons and dinners. She was charming, well-read. She had opinions on politics that were intelligent but not threatening. She made donations to the right charities, befriended the right people. Within 6 weeks, she'd been invited to a royal reception. She stood in the palace ballroom wearing emerald silk. Her hair was pinned up with pearl combs. Around her, nobility mingled and gossiped, the same faces she'd seen 1,000 times as queen. Now they looked at her like a stranger. An interesting newcomer, someone to cultivate or dismiss depending on her usefulness. Across the room, Lucien stood beside Celeste. His period of mourning had ended 2 weeks ago. The engagement hadn't been announced yet, but everyone knew. Celeste wore the queen's jewels. Not all of them, not yet, but enough to make a statement. Evelyn felt nothing looking at those gems. They were just stones, pretty chains she'd worn because duty demanded it. She accepted a glass of wine from a passing servant and moved through the crowd, listening, learning, gathering the threads she'd need to weave Lucian's noose. A young lord named Preston approached her. She remembered him as a minor functionary in the treasury. Ambitious. Easily flattered. "Lady Duval," he said with a slight bow. "I haven't had the pleasure. Lord Preston Ashford." "A pleasure, Lord Ashford." Her voice was pitched slightly different than it had been. Higher, softer. The queen had spoken with authority, born from years of command. Evelyn spoke like someone still learning the game. "You're causing quite a stir," Preston continued. "Fresh blood in these stale circles. Tell me, what brings you to the capital?" "Boredom, mostly." Evelyn sipped her wine. "Managing estates is profitable but deadly dull. I wanted something more stimulating." "You've come to the right place, though I warn you, palace politics make estate management look peaceful." "I've heard rumors," Evelyn's tone was carefully casual, "about tensions in the council, about concerns over the treasury." Preston's smile tightened. "Just rumors, nothing substantial." "Of course." She gave him a look that suggested she knew better but wouldn't press. "Still, I find the kingdom's financial policies fascinating. The way funds flow through various departments, the oversight mechanisms, or lack thereof." Something shifted in Preston's expression. Interest. "You have a head for numbers?" "My father insisted I understand the family finances. Can't let the stewards rob you blind." She laughed, though I imagine royal accounting is considerably more complex. Complex is one word for it. Preston glanced around, lowered his voice. "If you're genuinely interested, I could show you some of the public records. The Treasury keeps archived documents available for noble review. Most people never bother, but for someone with your curiosity—" "I would love that," Evelyn said warmly. They made plans to meet at the Treasury archives the following week. Preston wandered off, looking pleased with himself. He had no idea he'd just been recruited. Evelyn continued through the ballroom. Every conversation was a calculation, every smile a weapon being sharpened. Then she felt it, a gaze on her back, steady, intense. She turned. Across the room, Lucien was watching her. Their eyes met. His expression was curious. Nothing more. The look of a king noticing an interesting new face in his court. Evelyn held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds, long enough to acknowledge, not long enough to challenge. Then she turned away, dismissing him. It was the first move in a game he didn't know he was playing, a game where the pieces were already in motion, and the queen he'd murdered had just returned to the board. Lucien didn't sleep well that night. He told himself it was the wine, too much of it at the reception, or perhaps the rich food. His chambers felt stifling despite the autumn chill seeping through the stone walls. Beside him, Celeste slept soundly, her breathing deep and even. She'd taken to sleeping in the king's bed 3 weeks after Serafina's funeral. The servants had stopped whispering about it, but it wasn't the wine keeping him awake. It was the woman in emerald silk. Something about her eyes, the way she'd looked at him. Not with the usual deference or calculation he was used to seeing in court. Just a flicker of recognition. Then dismissal, like he wasn't worth a second glance. It bothered him more than it should have. He rose before dawn and went to his study. The room was cold, dark. He lit a single lamp and pulled out the reports his spymaster had compiled on new arrivals to the capital. There weren't many. The season was wrong for social migrations. Lady Evelyn Duval. Northern Duchy. Family money from timber and silver mines. Parents deceased. No siblings, no scandals. She'd managed her family's holdings for nearly a decade with impressive efficiency. increased profits by 30%, resolved labor disputes without bloodshed, the kind of competence that was rare among nobility. Nothing suspicious, nothing that explained why his instincts were screaming. Lucian closed the file and stared at the lamp flame. He was being paranoid. Marcus Thorne's words at the funeral had gotten into his head. Seraphina's letter mentioning investigations and corruption. All of it circumstantial, all of it explainable. She was dead. The river had taken her. He'd watched them search for weeks, had stood on that bridge himself and looked down at the churning water. No one survived that fall, especially not in a storm. The woman in emerald silk was just a woman, a stranger with an unfortunate habit of looking at him like he was ordinary. He'd forget about her in a week, except he didn't. Evelyn was everywhere suddenly. At the theater, at political salons, at charity auctions where she outbid established nobles for art pieces that would hang in her townhouse. She moved through social circles like water finding cracks in stone. Effortless, inevitable, and she was good, better than good. She knew exactly what to say to flatter without seeming sycophantic. How to ask questions that made people feel intelligent. How to build alliances without appearing to need them. Within a month, half the minor nobility considered her a friend. Within 2 months, she'd been invited to join the Ladies' Council for War Orphans, a charity Seraphina had founded. That detail made Lucian's jaw tight. He started paying closer attention. Not directly. That would look obsessive. But he had people watch her, report back. What she did. Who she spoke with. What she bought. The reports came back frustratingly mundane. She attended salons, donated to charities, had tea with merchants' wives, and discussed import tariffs. She visited the Treasury archives twice a week with Lord Preston Ashford, studying old financial records. Some hobby about understanding royal accounting systems. Harmless. Boring, even. So why did it feel like she was circling him? 2 months after her arrival, Evelyn requested a private audience with the king. The request came through proper channels. Nothing unusual about it. Nobles often sought royal audiences to discuss grievances or proposals. Lucien almost declined. His schedule was packed with council meetings and treaty negotiations, but curiosity won. He granted her 15 minutes on a Thursday afternoon. She arrived exactly on time. Wore burgundy this time. Her hair was simpler than it had been at the reception. Less jewelry. More business than performance. She curtsied with perfect form and waited for permission to speak. Lucien gestured to the chair across from his desk. The study was designed to intimidate. High ceilings, dark wood, portraits of previous kings staring down with stern faces. Most people who sat in that chair looked small. Evelyn looked comfortable. "Your Majesty," she began. Her voice was steady. "Thank you for seeing me. You have 15 minutes, Lady Duval. Make them count. I'll need 10. She smiled slightly. "I've been reviewing the kingdom's charitable foundations, specifically those established by Queen Seraphina, the Veterans Fund, the War Orphans Program, the Widows Assistance League." Lucian kept his expression neutral. "What about them? They're hemorrhaging money." Evelyn pulled a folder from her bag and set it on his desk. Not from corruption. From incompetence. The administrators don't understand proper fund allocation. Money that should go to veterans is being spent on administrative overhead. Orphanages are paying double for supplies because no one's negotiating bulk contracts. "This isn't your concern," Lucian said coolly. "It is if I'm donating to them." Evelyn met his eyes. "I've given 10,000 crowns to these foundations in the last 2 months. I'd like to know it's not being wasted. The Queen built something important. It would be a shame to watch it collapse through negligence. The Queen is dead." The words came out harsher than he intended, which is why someone needs to protect her legacy. Evelyn's tone didn't change. Respectful, firm. "With your permission, I'd like to audit these foundations, identify inefficiencies, propose reforms. Free of charge. I have experience managing large operations. This wouldn't be difficult." Lucien studied her, trying to find the angle. The manipulation. Everyone wanted something. No one offered help without expecting return. "Why?" he asked finally. "What do you gain?" "Peace of mind." Evelyn leaned back slightly. "And perhaps a reputation as someone who gets things done. I'm new to the capital, Your Majesty. I need to establish credibility. Fixing the late Queen's charity seems like a worthy project. It made sense. Too much sense, which meant it was probably true. Or a very good lie. You'll report your findings to me directly, Lucian said. No one else. If you discover theft or fraud, you bring it to me first. Of course, and you'll have access to the Foundation records. Nothing else. No treasury documents, no council files. I only need what pertains to the charities. Eveline stood, curtsied again. Thank you, Your Majesty. I won't waste your time. She left before her 15 minutes were up. Lucian sat alone in his study and felt the first real thread of unease pull tight in his chest. There was nothing wrong with what she'd proposed, nothing suspicious about a wealthy noblewoman wanting to improve charities. So why did it feel like she'd just moved a piece on a game board he couldn't see? He called for his spy master that evening. Marcus Venn was a thin man with forgettable features and a mind like a steel trap. He'd served 3 kings and survived 2 purges. If there was dirt to find, Marcus found it. The Lady Duval, Lucien said without preamble. I want to know everything. Where her money really comes from, who she's meeting in private, whether anyone in her past has connections to Serafina. Marcus raised an eyebrow. You suspect her of something specific? I suspect everyone of everything. Lucien poured himself wine. She's too perfect, too competent. People like that either want something or they're hiding something. I'll dig deeper. Marcus made a note. Though if I may, Your Majesty, paranoia about every new face at court will exhaust you. Most people are exactly what they appear to be. Most people didn't murder their wives, Lucian thought, but didn't say. Just do it, he said instead. Marcus bowed and left. The investigation took 3 weeks. When Marcus returned, he looked puzzled. She's clean, he said, spreading papers across Lucien's desk. Too clean. Her finances are transparent. Her family's wealth is legitimate. Her staff loves her. Her business dealings are ethical to the point of being naive. She overpays her servants and negotiates contracts that favor her partners. That's not normal. No. Marcus frowned. Nobility don't behave this way. They exploit advantages. She creates them for others. It's almost like she's trying to build goodwill systematically. For what purpose? That's what I can't determine. Marcus tapped one of the papers. But there's something odd. 6 months ago, there's no record of her. No correspondence, no travel documents, no receipts, nothing. Then suddenly she appears with a full history that checks out when verified. People can be private, not nobility. They generate paper trails constantly. Letters, invitations, estate records. She has all of it, but it's like it materialized overnight, perfectly documented, perfectly normal, perfectly false. The words hung between them. You think she's a plant? Lucian said slowly. An agent. I think she's someone who didn't exist 6 months ago and went to extraordinary lengths to create a believable identity. Marcus met his eyes. The question is why? And who she's working for? Lucien's mouth went dry. 6 months ago was when Serafina died. Impossible. He forced the word out steady. You're connecting coincidences. Perhaps. Marcus gathered his papers. But I'll keep digging. If there's a connection to anyone hostile to the crown, I'll find it. After he left, Lucian stood at the window and looked out over the capital. Lights flickered in windows. Smoke rose from chimneys. His empire, his kingdom, built on Serafina's sacrifices, and now his to rule without her interference. Except somewhere out there, a woman with 2 perfect credentials was auditing his dead wife's charities and asking questions about financial records. He told himself it was nothing. He almost believed it. Eveline spent her days in Foundation offices reviewing ledgers. The work was tedious, necessary, and it gave her access to something far more valuable than charitable accounting. Names. Every administrator who'd been appointed in the last 2 years. Every vendor who'd been given contracts. Every donation that had come through official channels. She cross-referenced them against Treasury records Lord Preston had helped her access, against council appointment lists, against property transfers and business registrations. Patterns emerged. Celeste's fingerprints were everywhere. A cousin appointed to manage the orphanage fund, a business partner awarded the supply contract at triple the normal rate. Donations from merchants who'd received favorable tariff rulings. Money flowing in circles that always ended in accounts Celeste controlled. It was elegant, almost invisible. Serafina would have missed it if she hadn't been looking. But Evelyn was always looking now. She documented everything, built spreadsheets showing the flow of money, created timelines, compiled evidence that wouldn't convince a court but would destroy a reputation. Not yet, though. The foundation work was just the opening move. Proof of incompetence and minor corruption wouldn't topple a king. It would just make him careful. She needed him afraid, paranoid, making mistakes. So she started appearing places Lucian would be. Not obviously. Not often enough to seem deliberate. But the theater when he attended. The same restaurant, the same garden party. Always at a distance, always looking away first. Like she had better things to focus on than the king. It worked. She could feel his attention on her. Sharp. Suspicious. He was having her investigated. Good. Let him waste resources. Let him dig into the identity she'd spent 2 months building. Every document was real. Every reference checked out. The woman named Eveline Duval existed completely. The woman named Seraphina Vale had burned away in a carriage fire and drowned in a river. That ghost was buried deep where no one would find her. 3 months after her arrival, Evelyn hosted a salon. It was small, intimate. 20 guests carefully selected from the capital's intellectual elite. Minor nobles, scholars, a few merchants with political ambitions. The kind of people who influenced opinion without holding official power. The topic was governance and accountability. Specifically, whether the royal council had too much unchecked authority. Dangerous territory. But Evelyn framed it as academic, theoretical. What safeguards existed in other kingdoms? What historical precedent showed the risks of concentrated power? The guests argued passionately. Some defended the current system. Others suggested reforms. Evelyn moderated, asked questions, pushed people to defend their positions with evidence. By the end of the evening, 3 nobles who'd entered as loyal royalists left questioning whether the council's financial oversight was adequate. Seeds planted. Word of the salon spread. Evelyn hosted another one a month later. Then another. Each time the guest list expanded. Each time the questions got sharper. Not attacking the king directly. Never that. But questioning the systems around him. The lack of transparency. The concentration of power in hands that answered to no one. It was sedition disguised as philosophy. Rebellion wrapped in intellectual discourse. And it was working. 6 months after Seraphina's death, the first anonymous pamphlet appeared in the capital. It was crude, badly printed, distributed by hand in markets and taverns. The content was inflammatory. Accusations that the royal council was embezzling funds, that common taxes were being diverted to private accounts, that the king's advisors were enriching themselves while veterans starved. No proof, just allegations. But they matched the whispers that had been growing since Eveline's salon started. Lucien had the city guard confiscate every copy they could find, arrested the printer, executed him for sedition. It didn't matter. 2 weeks later, another pamphlet appeared. Then another. Each one more specific. Naming names, citing amounts. The palace issued denials, called them lies spread by enemies of the state, promised investigations. But damage was done. People were asking questions, demanding audits. The merchant guilds petitioned for financial transparency. The minor nobility started refusing to approve new taxes without seeing budget reports. Lucien convened an emergency council meeting. Eveline heard about it from Lord Preston, who'd been invited to present treasury findings. She'd spent months cultivating him, making him believe the discoveries were his own. Now he stood before the king and council, nervous but determined, presenting evidence of irregularities. Nothing criminal, just incompetence and waste. But enough to make the council look ineffective. That same week, Celeste's cousin was caught stealing from the orphanage fund. It wasn't a large amount, 500 crowns over 6 months, but it was blatant, undeniable, the kind of theft that demanded public punishment. Lucien had him arrested quietly, tried to keep it internal. Eveline made sure the story leaked. The capital exploded. The beloved queen's charity, established to help children orphaned by war, had been robbed. By someone connected to Lady Celeste Morcant, the king's soon-to-be-announced fiancée. The scandal was perfect. Not quite enough to destroy Celeste, but enough to taint her, to make people question her character, to remind everyone that she'd been Lucien's mistress while Seraphina was alive. Whispers became accusations. Had Celeste been stealing from charities the whole time? Had the queen known? Was that why she'd seemed so stressed before her death? Lucian tried to contain it, issued statements, had loyalists defend Celeste at court, blamed the theft on a single corrupt individual, but the narrative had escaped his control. And in the center of it all, visible but not prominent, Lady Evelyn Duval continued her work, auditing foundations, hosting salons, being helpful, being perfect, being invisible. 7 months after her arrival, Evelyn received a dinner invitation from General Marcus Thorne. She'd been expecting it. Thorne was loyal to Seraphina's memory. He'd been investigating corruption just like Evelyn. Their paths were bound to cross. The dinner was at his estate outside the capital. Small gathering, just a few trusted friends, officers who'd served with him during the war, nobles who'd supported Seraphina's policies. Evelyn arrived in dark blue, conservative, respectful. She knew most of the guests by reputation, had studied their loyalties and grievances. Marcus greeted her warmly. He was in his 50s, broad-shouldered, scarred from decades of combat. His eyes were sharp with intelligence that had kept him alive through palace purges. "Lady Duval," he said, "I've been wanting to meet you properly. Your work with the Queen's foundations has been remarkable. I only wish I could have done it while she was alive." Evelyn's voice carried just the right note of regret. From everything I've heard, she was an extraordinary woman. She was. Marcus's expression hardened, and her death was convenient for people who found her inconvenient. The words hung in the air. The other guests had gone quiet. Evelyn met his eyes. "Are you suggesting it wasn't an accident?" "I'm suggesting the timing was remarkable. A queen investigating corruption dies in a storm before she can present her findings. The people she was investigating are now running the kingdom." Marcus gestured to the dining room. "But we can discuss this over dinner. I've had my chef prepare something special." The meal was excellent. The conversation was better. These were people who'd served Seraphina, who'd watched her build systems to protect veterans and orphans, who'd seen those systems gutted after her death. They were angry, grieving, looking for direction. Evelyn listened more than she spoke, asked careful questions, let them reveal their suspicions, their evidence, what they knew and what they guessed. By dessert, she understood the shape of Marcus's investigation. He suspected Celeste of embezzlement, suspected Lucian of knowing and allowing it, suspected the council of being complicit, but he had no proof. Nothing that would hold up in a trial, just fragments and patterns, just like Evelyn. After dinner, Marcus walked her through his garden. The night was clear, stars scattered across black sky, their breath fogged in cold air. "You remind me of her," Marcus said quietly. "The way you work, methodical, patient, building foundations before you strike. I'll take that as a compliment." "It is." Marcus stopped walking, turned to face her. "Which is why I'm going to ask you something direct, and I want you to think carefully before answering. Who are you really?" Evelyn's heart didn't skip. She'd prepared for this. "I'm exactly who I appear to be." "No." Marcus shook his head. "I've had you investigated too. Everyone has. Your background is perfect, too perfect, like someone built it specifically to withstand scrutiny." He stepped closer. "You appeared 6 months ago, right after the Queen died. You've systematically infiltrated her charities, her social circles, her political networks. You're asking all the questions she would have asked, following all the threads she would have followed." He paused. "So I'll ask again. Who are you?" The moment balanced on a knife edge. Evelyn could lie, maintain the fiction, walk away from this alliance, or she could take the risk. She thought about Seraphina, about the woman who'd believed in loyalty and sacrifice, about the queen who died because she trusted the wrong man. That woman was gone. The woman who remained understood that revenge required allies, that justice needed witnesses, that to destroy a king, you needed a general's army. "If I told you," Evelyn said slowly, "that I was someone with intimate knowledge of the king's crimes, someone who'd been gathering evidence for months, someone who wanted the same thing you wanted, would that be enough?" Marcus studied her face, searching. Then his expression shifted, something like recognition, like puzzle pieces sliding into place. His voice came out rough. "It's not possible. She's dead. We searched. The river is deep and dark and full of secrets." Evelyn held his gaze. "And sometimes what's buried doesn't stay buried." The silence stretched. Marcus's jaw worked. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. Then he dropped to one knee. My queen. The words shattered something in Evelyn's chest. She hadn't heard them in 7 months. Hadn't realized how much she missed being seen. Being known. Get up, she said quietly. That woman drowned. You're looking at someone else now. Marcus rose. His eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. What do you need? Everything. Evelyn's voice hardened. I need evidence Lucian can't deny. I need witnesses he can't silence. I need the council fractured and the people demanding answers. I need him afraid and isolated and desperate enough to make mistakes. She stepped closer. And then I need him to watch everything he stole collapse. I need him to know it was me. That the wife he tried to murder came back and destroyed him. Marcus smiled. It wasn't a kind expression. Then let's get to work. They returned to his study. Spread out their evidence. His investigation and hers. Side by side, the picture emerged clearly. Celeste had been embezzling for 3 years, small amounts at first, then larger. She'd built a network of corrupt officials who funneled money through charities and government contracts. Lucien knew, had to know. He'd approved appointments, signed off on contracts, protected her when questions were raised, but knowing and proving were different things. We need someone inside, Marcus said. Someone close to Celeste who can testify. Give us documents we can't get otherwise. I have someone. Evelyn pulled out a file. Celeste's personal secretary, a woman named Helena Cross. She's been skimming records, small things, copies of letters, meeting notes. She's terrified of Celeste, but more terrified of being caught in the collapse. Can we trust her? Trust is irrelevant. Evelyn's smile was cold. Fear is better than loyalty. We give her immunity and protection. In exchange, she gives us everything. And if Lucien catches wind of it, then we move faster. Evelyn started organizing papers. The victory banquet is in 3 months. Every noble in the empire will be there. Every foreign ruler, every merchant and general and priest who matters. That's when we strike. Public. Undeniable. No way for him to suppress it. Marcus nodded slowly. You want to make sure the whole world watches him fall. I want to make sure he has nowhere to run. Evelyn's hands were steady as she worked. When I'm done, history will remember Lucien Arden as the king who murdered his wife and stole from his people, who betrayed every oath he ever swore. She looked up, and they'll remember Seraphina Vale as the queen who came back from death to bring him justice. The general's expression was fierce. Then we'd better not fail. They worked through the night, building timelines, identifying weak points in Celeste's network, planning approaches to potential witnesses, creating redundancies in case evidence was destroyed. By dawn, they had a plan. It was dangerous, fragile, dependent on dozens of people making the right choices at the right time. But it was possible. Evelyn left Marcus's estate as the sun rose. She rode back to the capital in golden light, her mind already 3 steps ahead. There were people to recruit, documents to secure, stories to plant. The game was entering its final phase, and she'd just gained the most important piece on the board. 3 days later, Helena Cross disappeared from the palace. The official story was that she'd returned home to care for a sick relative. But palace staff knew better. Whispers spread that she'd been arrested, or killed, or fled before someone killed her. Celeste tore her chambers apart looking for missing documents, found enough gaps to know Helena had been stealing records. Had the guards searched the city, offered rewards for information. They found nothing. Helena was in a safe house Marcus controlled, guarded by soldiers loyal to Seraphina's memory, spending her days writing out everything she knew, names, dates, amounts, conversations she'd overheard, letters she'd copied. It was damning, incomplete, but damning. Lucien knew something was wrong. Celeste had been furious for days, paranoid, seeing threats everywhere. She'd demanded they move up their wedding, formalize her position before anything else went wrong. He'd refused. The timing was bad. The scandals around her cousin's theft hadn't settled. Public opinion was already fragile. They'd fought. Badly. The kind of fight that revealed the cracks in their alliance. She'd accused him of being weak, of letting minor setbacks terrify him, of not protecting her the way he'd promised. He'd accused her of being reckless, of drawing attention with her corruption, of costing him political capital he couldn't afford to lose. In the end, they'd reached a cold truce. The wedding would wait, but not long. That night, stood in his study and stared at the portrait of Serafina that still hung on the wall. He'd meant to take it down, replace it with something else, but he'd never gotten around to it. She looked back at him with painted eyes, serene, confident, like she was judging him from beyond death. "You were supposed to be easy to kill," he said to the portrait. "Drink the wine. Die quietly. Everyone mourns." I moved forward. The painted face offered no answers. He'd loved her once. He remembered that. Young and stupid and certain they could change the world together. She'd been so fierce, so convinced that duty and honor meant something. He'd learned better. Power meant something. Control meant something. Love was just a weakness people exploited. So he'd chosen Celeste, chosen ambition, chosen survival. And now everything was falling apart anyway. The door opened. Celeste entered without knocking. Her face was tight with stress. "We have a problem," she said. "The merchant guilds are demanding a financial audit, full transparency. They're threatening to withhold tax payments if we refuse." "Let them threaten." Lucian turned from the portrait. "We'll make examples of the ringleaders. That won't work this time." Celeste moved closer. "There are too many. And they have support from minor nobles, from retired military officers. Someone's been organizing them, building a coalition." "Who?" "I don't know," Celeste's voice cracked slightly, "but it's coordinated, professional, like someone who understands how to leverage political pressure." She grabbed his arm. "Lucien, we're losing control. We need to do something dramatic, arrest someone prominent, make it clear we won't tolerate dissent. And prove we're tyrants?" Lucien pulled away. "That's exactly what they want. Evidence we're the villains they're painting us as." "Then what do you suggest?" "I suggest," Lucien said coldly, "that you figure out who's organizing this opposition and make them stop. Quietly. Permanently." "Isn't that supposed to be your specialty?" Celeste's eyes flashed. "Don't you dare put this on me. You're the one who hesitated, who played it safe, who let minor scandals become major problems. If you just married me immediately after Serafina died, none of this would have happened. If you'd been less greedy, we wouldn't have scandals." Lucien's voice dropped. "How many accounts, Celeste? How much did you steal?" "I didn't steal. I took compensation for my work, for the risks I took helping you. You took money from charities, from funds meant for veterans and orphans. You made yourself rich while you sat on your throne and pretended to be noble?" Celeste laughed bitterly. "You murdered your wife. Don't lecture me about morality." The words hung between them, sharp, true, unforgivable. "Get out," Lucien said quietly. Celeste stared at him. Then she turned and left, slammed the door hard enough to rattle the frame. Lucien was alone again with Serafina's portrait. He walked to his desk, pulled out the file on Lady Eveline Duval, read through it again, looking for something. Anything that explained the feeling in his gut that said she was important, that she was connected to his problems somehow. But there was nothing. Just a noblewoman who hosted salons and fixed charities and asked too many intelligent questions. He closed the file and poured himself wine. Somewhere in the capital, Evelyn sat in her study with Marcus and reviewed the final pieces of their plan. They had evidence. They had witnesses. They had allies positioned throughout the court and military. 3 months until the victory banquet. 3 months to shore up every weakness, to prepare for every contingency. 3 months until Lucien Arden's world ended. Eveline looked at the calendar on her desk, counted the days, felt something cold and certain settle in her chest. Not revenge, justice, not anger, clarity. She was going to destroy him, systematically, publicly, completely, and he would never see it coming until the moment she wanted him to see. Until she pulled off the mask and let him recognize the wife he'd killed. Let him understand that every mistake he'd made, every ally he'd lost, every scandal that had weakened him, it had all been her. The dead queen. Come back to bury him. She smiled in the darkness of her study. It wasn't a kind expression. Soon, she thought, very soon. The first crack appeared 6 weeks before the victory banquet. Eveline was in her study reviewing testimony from Helena Cross when the messenger arrived. Young boy. Street clothes. Eyes too sharp for his age. He handed her a sealed envelope and vanished before she could ask questions. The seal was unfamiliar. She broke it carefully. Inside was a single line in handwriting she didn't recognize. "They know who you are." Her hand stayed steady, but her pulse kicked hard. She read it again. Turned the paper over. Nothing else. No signature. No explanation. Could be a bluff. Could be someone fishing. Could be genuine warning from an ally she didn't know she had. Or it could mean the entire operation was compromised. She burned the letter immediately, watched the paper curl and blacken in the fireplace. Then she sent word to Marcus. Coded message. Emergency meeting at the safe house outside the city. He arrived within the hour looking grim. "Tell me," she said before he'd even closed the door. Marcus pulled off his riding gloves. His jaw was tight. "One of Celeste's informants approached me yesterday, offered to sell information about a northern noblewoman who's been asking dangerous questions. He claimed she's not who she pretends to be. Did he have proof? He said he had a source, someone close to you, someone who'd figured it out." Marcus met her eyes. "I paid him for the information. Found out the source is your housekeeper. Woman named Clara Moss." Evelyn's stomach dropped. Clara had been with her since she established the Duval identity. Quiet, efficient, unremarkable. She'd come with references, background that checked out, or so Evelyn had thought. "Where is she now?" Evelyn's voice came out flat. "Gone. Disappeared 2 days ago. Took nothing with her. Just vanished." Marcus moved to the window. "If she's working for Celeste, she's had months to gather evidence. Letters you've written, documents you've been compiling. She could have copied everything. Then why hasn't Celeste made a move? Why send anonymous warnings?" "Because she's not certain yet." Marcus turned back. "She suspects, has fragments. But if she accuses you publicly without proof, you can destroy her credibility. Claim persecution, play the victim. She needs to be absolutely sure before she acts." "How long do we have?" "Days. Maybe a week." Marcus's expression was iron. "We need to move the timeline up. Strike before she can solidify her case. We're not ready. The witnesses aren't all secured. Half the documents are still being compiled. If we go early, we leave gaps Lucien can exploit. If we wait, we'll be the ones in chains." Marcus stepped closer. "You know I'm right. We move now or we lose everything." Evelyn wanted to argue, wanted to believe they had more time, but she'd spent too many years learning to recognize when a plan was collapsing, when the only choice was to salvage what you could or watch it all burn. She thought about Serafina, the queen who'd believed in doing things properly, following protocols, building unshakable foundations. That woman would have waited, would have made sure every detail was perfect. That woman was dead. Evelyn made her decision in the space between heartbeats, the kind of decision that separated survivors from casualties. "We accelerate," she said. "The spring gala is in 10 days, smaller venue than the victory banquet, but still public. Still witnessed. We present what we have. It won't be everything, but it'll be enough to start the collapse. And if Celeste moves first, then we improvise." Evelyn's smile was knife-sharp. "I've gotten good at surviving things that should have killed me." They spent the next 3 days in controlled chaos, consolidating evidence, moving witnesses to secure locations, briefing allies on the compressed timeline. Every hour felt like sand slipping through fingers. On the 4th day, Helena Cross vanished. Marcus sent word at dawn. The safe house had been raided during the night. Guards killed. Helena taken. No witnesses except a stable boy who'd hidden in the hayloft and watched men in royal colors drag her away screaming. Evelyn read the message twice, felt something cold settle in her chest that had nothing to do with fear. This was worse than fear. This was the moment when you realized the knife you'd been holding had already been turned against you. She called an emergency meeting with her inner circle. 6 people who knew the full plan. Marcus, Lord Preston, 2 retired officers, a magistrate who'd served under Serafina, a merchant prince who controlled half the city's trade. They gathered in a warehouse Marcus owned. Neutral ground, defensible. "Helena's gone," Evelyn said without preamble, "which means they have her testimony. Everything she knows about our evidence, our witnesses, our timeline." "Can she hold out?" the magistrate asked. "Under interrogation?" "For a while." Marcus's voice was grim. "But eventually everyone breaks. We have to assume they'll extract everything within days. So we're finished. Preston looked sick. They know what we're planning. They'll arrest us before we can present anything. Only if they can prove conspiracy. Evelyn kept her voice steady even as her mind raced. Right now they have Helena's testimony, but testimony from a woman who stole documents and fled. That's not solid. They need corroboration. They need to catch us doing something overtly treasonous. Then we do nothing, one of the officers said. Lay low. Wait for this to blow over. There is no waiting. Evelyn met each person's eyes in turn. The moment we go quiet, we look guilty. The moment we hesitate, Lucian consolidates power and crushes any opposition. Our only option is to attack. Make him defend. Keep him off balance. Attack with what? Preston gestured helplessly. Our star witness is captured. Half our evidence is compromised. We're not ready. Then we make them think we're more ready than we are. Evelyn pulled out a folder. We leak partial documents. Enough to raise questions, but not enough to reveal our full case. We force Lucian to respond to allegations. Every response is a weakness. Every denial is something we can later prove false. The magistrate frowned. You're talking about a propaganda war. That could take months. That? We don't have months. We have days. Evelyn's jaw set. So we compress it. We hit him from 6 directions at once. Financial accusations. Testimonies about Celeste's corruption. Questions about the Queen's death. We create so much smoke he can't find the fire until it's consumed him. And if it doesn't work? Marcus asked quietly. If we swing and miss, we're all dead. Then we're dead fighting instead of dead running. Evelyn stood. I didn't survive drowning to hide in the dark waiting for mercy. She looked at each of them. You're free to walk away. No judgment. No consequences. But decide now. Silence filled the warehouse. These were people who'd committed themselves to justice, who'd believed they were building something righteous and inevitable. Now they faced the reality that righteous causes could fail. That inevitability was a lie people told themselves to sleep at night. One by one, they nodded. The merchant prince spoke first. I'm in. My ships. My money. My networks. The officers followed. Then the magistrate. Then Preston, looking terrified but determined. Marcus was last. His voice carried weight of decades commanding men in impossible situations. We end this, one way or another. They spent the next 72 hours implementing chaos. Anonymous pamphlets flooded the capital, detailed accusations about Celeste's embezzlement, names, dates, amounts. Not everything Helena had provided, but enough to be damaging, enough to demand response. Simultaneously, letters went to every major noble house, carefully worded questions about financial irregularities in the royal council, suggestions that the king's advisors were enriching themselves, appeals to investigate before the corruption spread further. Merchants started refusing to pay taxes, citing lack of transparency, demanding audits. Their guild leaders gave speeches in public squares about fiscal responsibility and royal accountability. Veterans began gathering at the palace gates, silent protests. Hundreds of men and women who'd served under Serafina, who'd watched her charities collapse after her death. They didn't riot, didn't shout, just stood there, day after day. A living reminder. The pressure built like steam in a sealed kettle. Lucien convened emergency council sessions, issued denials, arrested pamphleteers. But for every printer he jailed, 2 more appeared. For every accusation he denied, 3 new ones surfaced. He was drowning in allegations, and he knew it. Evelyn watched from her townhouse as the capital descended into controlled chaos. She didn't leave, didn't attend salons or dinners, just waited, visible but quiet, letting the storm rage around her. On the 6th day, Celeste made her move. Royal guards arrived at Evelyn's door at dawn, a dozen men in full armor, led by the captain of the palace guard. Lady Evelyn Duval, he announced. You are summoned to the palace to answer questions regarding sedition and conspiracy against the crown. Not arrested, summoned. The distinction mattered. It meant they weren't certain yet, meant they wanted her off balance, wanted to see how she'd react. Evelyn dressed carefully, simple gown, no jewelry, hair pulled back severe. She looked like a woman who had nothing to hide, who was cooperative and confused by the accusations. The guards escorted her through streets where people watched with wary eyes. Word had spread fast. The woman who'd been fixing the Queen's charities was being brought in for questioning. The implications rippled through crowds like wind across water. The throne room was empty except for Lucien, Celeste, and a handful of advisors. No public audience. No witnesses. This was meant to be intimidation, interrogation, the kind of conversation where threats could be made without consequence. Evelyn was brought before the throne. She curtsied properly, kept her eyes lowered just long enough to show respect but not submission. Lucien studied her from his elevated seat. He looked exhausted. Stress had carved new lines around his eyes. His crown sat slightly crooked, like he'd forgotten he was wearing it. "Lady Duval," he began, "you've become quite prominent in recent months. I try to be useful, Your Majesty." "Useful?" Lucien's laugh was bitter. "Is that what you call spreading sedition? Funding anonymous pamphlets? Organizing protests?" "I've done no such thing." Evelyn's voice stayed steady. "I've worked with charitable foundations and hosted intellectual salons, both legal activities. You've been asking questions." Celeste stepped forward. Her dress was crimson, her expression predatory. "About financial records, about the late Queen's investigations, about matters that don't concern you." "The welfare of the kingdom concerns every citizen." Evelyn met her eyes. "Or is questioning the council's financial practices now treasonous? When those questions are designed to undermine royal authority, yes." Celeste moved closer. "You're not who you claim to be. We know that. We just haven't proven it yet." Evelyn's pulse kicked, but she didn't let it show. "Then I suppose you should keep investigating until you're satisfied." "Oh, we will." Celeste's smile was cruel. "We're very thorough. For instance, we know you had extensive contact with General Marcus Thorne. We know you've been meeting with witnesses who fled royal custody. We know you've been compiling evidence for what I can only assume is a planned coup." "That's absurd." Evelyn forced indignation into her voice. "I've met with General Thorne as any concerned citizen might. I've worked with legitimate charities. I've compiled evidence of financial mismanagement which I plan to present through proper channels." "Proper channels?" Lucien stood, descended the throne steps. Each footfall echoed in the empty hall. "You want to know what I think, Lady Duval? I think you're exactly what Celeste says. A plant. An agent. Someone sent to destabilize my rule." He was close now. Close enough she could see the paranoia burning in his eyes. Close enough to smell the wine on his breath. He'd been drinking, probably for days. "I think you appeared 6 months after my wife died. I think that timing is more than coincidence. I think you've been waging a very careful, very calculated campaign to destroy me." His voice dropped. "What I can't figure out is why." This was the moment, the precipice. Evelyn could maintain the fiction, could deny everything, could try to escape and regroup, or she could end it here, now. Let him see the truth and watch his world shatter in real time. She made the choice without hesitation, not because it was strategic, because she was tired of hiding, tired of being someone else, tired of watching him breathe free air while pretending ignorance. "You really don't recognize me," she said quietly. Something flickered in Lucien's expression. Confusion, then suspicion. "I stood in this throne room 1,000 times." Evelyn's voice changed, hardened, lost the careful modulation she'd been using for months. "I wore that crown you're so desperate to keep. I fought battles you took credit for. I built systems you dismantled. I saved your life 3 times and you repaid me by plotting my murder." Lucien went white. "It's not possible. You're dead." "I watched them search. I saw the debris." "You saw what I wanted you to see." Evelyn pulled the pearl comb from her hair, let it fall in dark waves around her face, stood straighter, let the queen she'd been bleeding through the mask she'd worn. "You buried an empty casket, mourned a corpse that never existed. While I survived, planned, and came back to destroy you." The throne room was silent except for breathing, harsh, ragged, shocked. Celeste recovered first. Her hand moved to a concealed dagger at her waist. "You're insane, trying to claim you're the dead queen. It's pathetic." "Serafina." Lucien's voice cracked. His face was ash. "Serafina, you can't be—" "I'm not." Evelyn's smile was cold. Serafina Vale drowned in the Ashfall River. "I'm what survived the drowning. I'm what you created when you chose to kill me instead of facing me." She stepped closer. "You wanted a ghost husband? Congratulations. You got one. Lucien stumbled backward. His legs hit the throne steps. He sat down hard, staring at her like she was death incarnate. This proves nothing, Celeste said quickly. She's just a madwoman claiming an identity. Probably read about the queen and lost her mind. Really? Evelyn turned to face her. Then explain how I know about the poison you plan to use. The vial hidden in your chambers. The physician you bribed. The exact conversation you had with Lucien about making my death look natural. She smiled at Celeste's shock. You're not the only one who had spies, Lady Morcant. Guards, Celeste snapped. Arrest her. Now. The guards didn't move. They were looking at Evelyn with dawning recognition, seen past the different hair and clothes to the woman they'd sworn to serve, the queen they'd mourned. One of them dropped to his knee. Your Majesty. Then another. Then all of them. Celeste's composure shattered. She lunged. The dagger flashed out, aimed for Evelyn's throat. Evelyn was faster. Months of surviving had honed instincts the queen never needed. She sidestepped, caught Celeste's wrist, twisted. The dagger clattered to marble floor. You tried to steal everything from me, Evelyn said softly. My husband, my throne, my legacy. She tightened her grip until Celeste gasped. Did you really think I'd let you succeed? She shoved Celeste away. The woman stumbled into the arms of guards who now gripped her firmly. Evelyn turned back to Lucien. He hadn't moved, sat frozen on the steps. Face slack with shock and something that might have been relief or terror, or both. 12 years, she said. I gave you 12 years of loyalty, of sacrifice, of love. She walked closer. And you repaid me by planning my murder so you could marry your mistress and loot the kingdom. Tell me, Lucien, was it worth it? He opened his mouth, closed it. No words came. That's what I thought. Evelyn gestured to the guards. Arrest them both. Charges of conspiracy to commit murder, embezzlement, treason against the crown. They'll stand trial, public trial, where everyone can see what they did. The guards moved. Lucien didn't resist as they pulled him to his feet, locked irons around his wrists. He just stared at Evelyn with hollow eyes. I loved you, he said finally. His voice was broken. I did. Once. I know. Evelyn felt nothing looking at him. Not anger, not satisfaction, just cold certainty. That's why it hurts. That's why you'll spend the rest of your life knowing you destroyed something real for something empty. They led him away. Celeste screaming protests and threats. Lucien silent, defeated. Evelyn stood alone in the throne room. The crown sat abandoned on the throne, slightly crooked, tarnished from months of Lucien's paranoid handling. She should have felt victorious, triumphant. She'd done it, exposed them, won. Instead, she felt hollow. The door opened. Marcus entered, followed by a dozen armed soldiers. He stopped when he saw her, saw the empty throne, the abandoned crown. It's done? He asked. It's done. Evelyn's voice was tired. They're arrested. We'll present the evidence publicly. Let the kingdom decide their fate. The kingdom will demand blood. Marcus moved closer. You know that. They'll want executions, justice for their murdered queen. Maybe. Evelyn walked to the throne, picked up the crown, felt its weight. Once it had meant duty, honor, sacrifice. Now it just felt heavy. But that's not why I did this. I didn't come back for revenge. Then why? Because someone had to prove that actions have consequences. That betrayal doesn't go unpunished. That power isn't a shield against justice. She turned the crown over in her hands, and because I needed to know if the woman I was could survive becoming what I needed to be. And I survived. Evelyn set the crown back on the throne. But I don't know if I won. Marcus was quiet for a moment, then, what happens now? Now we hold the trial. Present everything. Let the evidence speak. Evelyn moved toward the door. And then I decide if a dead queen can rule a living kingdom, or if some ghost should stay buried. She walked out into the palace corridors. Servants and guards lined the walls, staring, whispering. The word was spreading like wildfire. The queen had returned. The king was arrested. The empire was in chaos. Evelyn moved through them without stopping, her mind already racing ahead. There would be resistance. Nobles loyal to Lucien, council members who'd profited from corruption, foreign powers who'd see instability as opportunity. She'd built a case strong enough to expose Lucien and Celeste. But was it strong enough to rebuild a kingdom? To convince people that a queen who'd faked her death and waged secret war on her husband deserved to rule again? She didn't know. For the first time since she'd jumped into the Ashfall River, Evelyn felt the full weight of uncertainty. She'd survived betrayal, survived drowning, survived months as someone else. But could she survive being Seraphina Vale again? The answer came 3 days later. The trial was set. Public venue. Open testimony. Every piece of evidence laid bare for the kingdom to judge. Marcus had secured the venue, arranged security, prepared witnesses. Everything was ready. Evelyn was in her study reviewing final preparations when the messenger arrived. Different boy this time, but same urgent energy, same envelope with unfamiliar seal. She opened it with growing dread. Inside was a document, official, stamped with the royal seal, dated 2 weeks before her staged death. It was a marriage annulment, signed by Lucien, filed with the royal archives, dissolving his marriage to Seraphina Vale on grounds of irreconcilable differences and mutual agreement. The signature at the bottom was hers. Perfect forgery. Impossible to prove false without extensive investigation. The implications hit like a physical blow. If this document was authentic, she'd voluntarily annulled her marriage, which meant she'd voluntarily abdicated her claim to the throne, which meant she had no legal standing to challenge Lucien's rule, no right to the crown, no authority to bring charges. Everything she'd built, every move she'd made, every sacrifice and calculation, all of it rested on her identity as the rightful queen, and someone had just destroyed that foundation with a single forged document. Her hands shook, not with fear, with rage, with the realization that she'd been outplayed, that while she'd been hunting Lucien, someone else had been hunting her, setting traps, preparing counters. A note fell from the envelope. 3 lines in elegant handwriting she didn't recognize. The trial will not proceed. The charges will be dismissed. Walk away now or we release this document and destroy you completely. No signature, no demands, just the promise of mutual destruction. Evelyn stood in her study holding the forged annulment. The crown she'd fought so hard to reclaim was slipping through her fingers like water, like drowning all over again. She'd survived betrayal by her husband, survived months of calculated revenge, but she hadn't prepared for this. For an enemy she couldn't see. For a betrayal from someone she didn't know existed. The queen in her wanted to fight, to expose the forgery, to stand trial and let truth prevail. But the survivor who'd clawed her way out of a river knew better, knew that truth was just another weapon, that justice was only as strong as the power backing it, that sometimes winning meant knowing when you'd lost. She thought about Seraphina, the woman who'd believed in honor and duty and playing by rules. That woman would have fought to the bitter end, would have chosen principle over survival. Evelyn was learning she wasn't that woman anymore, wasn't sure if she wanted to be. The choice sat before her stark and terrible. Fight and risk everything, walk away and live, compromise and try to salvage something from the wreckage. There were no good options, just different flavors of failure. She stood at her window and watched the capital burn with twilight. Somewhere out there, Lucien sat in a cell awaiting trial. Celeste screamed threats in another. Marcus prepared testimony. Witnesses rehearsed their statements. An entire machinery of justice she'd built piece by piece, and now one forged document threatened to dismantle all of it. Evelyn closed her eyes, felt the weight of months pressing down, felt the ghost of Seraphina Vale demanding she fight, felt the cold survivor instinct screaming she adapt or die. In the end, survival always won. It had to. Because dead heroes inspired songs, but living women rebuilt kingdoms. She burned the annulment document, watched it curl and blacken just like the first anonymous warning. Then she sat down and began writing a new plan. Not justice, not revenge. Something messier, something that required her to become something neither Seraphina nor Evelyn had ever been. Something that required her to compromise every principle she'd thought was unbreakable. But she would survive. She always did. Even if it meant becoming unrecognizable to herself. Even if it meant discovering that the woman who drowned in the Ashfall River had taken more than just a name with her to the bottom. She'd taken every certainty about who she was and what she believed, and the woman who'd surfaced wasn't sure what was left. The new plan was simpler and infinitely more dangerous. Evelyn sat in the darkness of her study and wrote 3 letters. Her hand was steady. The words came without hesitation because she'd learned that hesitation was how good people died while bad people thrived. Serafina would have agonized over what she was about to do, would have searched for a moral path through impossible terrain. Evelyn just wrote. The first letter went to Marcus. Instructions for the trial. Not the full evidence presentation they'd planned. Something smaller, targeted. Enough to wound Lucien publicly, but not enough to trigger the release of that forged annulment. She was playing a new game now. Not justice. Survival with maximum damage. The second letter went to contacts in 3 foreign kingdoms. Merchants she'd cultivated. Minor nobles who owed her favors. The message was careful, coded, but the intent was clear. If something happened to her in the next 72 hours, certain documents would be released. Documents proving that Lucien had solicited foreign backing for his coup against Serafina. Treason of the highest order. It was a bluff. The documents didn't exist, but the threat would buy her insurance. Make whoever was protecting Lucien think twice about destroying her completely. The third letter was to Lucien himself. She wrote it in her own hand. No code. No pretense. You wanted me dead. I wanted you destroyed. We both failed. Now we negotiate or we both lose everything. The trial happens in 2 days. I'll present limited evidence. Enough to damage you, not enough to execute you. In exchange, you confess to the affair and the embezzlement. You abdicate. You live. Refuse. And I burn the kingdom down around us both. You know I'm capable of it. You made me this way. She sealed it with wax. Had it delivered to his cell by a guard Marcus controlled. Then she waited. The reply came at dawn. A single word scrawled on the back of her letter. No. Evelyn read it 3 times. Felt something cold and certain crystallize in her chest. Lucien was calling her bluff. Gambling that she wouldn't risk total destruction. That somewhere inside she still cared about the kingdom enough to compromise. He was wrong. When you've already drowned once, the second time isn't frightening. It's almost peaceful. The letting go. The surrender to forces bigger than yourself. Serafina had cared about the kingdom, had sacrificed everything for its stability, had believed that preserving the empire mattered more than personal justice. But Serafina was dead. And the woman who'd replaced her had learned a harder truth, that kingdoms built on lies deserved to burn, that stability purchased with betrayal was just prolonged suffering, that sometimes destruction was the only path to rebuilding something real. She'd tried to do this cleanly, tried to use law and evidence and procedure, tried to be the queen everyone remembered, but they'd backed her into a corner, forced her to choose between surrender and annihilation. So she chose annihilation. Evelyn stood and walked to her wardrobe, pushed past the fine gowns and silk, found the leather trunk she'd hidden at the back. Inside were things Serafina Vale would never have touched. Weapons she'd collected during her months as someone else. Tools for survival when law and order collapsed. She pulled out a riding coat reinforced with thin steel plates, boots made for running and fighting, a belt with concealed knife sheaths, nothing obvious, nothing that would make her look like she was going to war. But she was. The trial was scheduled for noon in the Grand Assembly Hall, public venue, 1,000-person capacity. Every noble in the capital had demanded entrance. Foreign dignitaries, merchant princes, guild leaders, reporters who'd write accounts that would spread across the empire. Lucien thought he was walking into a controlled exposure. A slap on the wrist. Public embarrassment followed by retirement to some comfortable estate where he'd live out his days in obscure shame. He had no idea what was coming. Evelyn arrived at the hall 2 hours early. Marcus was already there with 50 soldiers, men who'd served under Serafina, who'd taken arrows and blade wounds fighting beside her, who'd mourned her death and now stood ready to defend her return. Your Majesty, Marcus's voice carried weight of military formality. The hall is secure. Witnesses are positioned. Evidence is compiled. But I need to know what we're actually doing here. Your instructions were vague. That's because what I'm about to do isn't legal. Evelyn met his eyes. I'm not presenting a case. I'm starting a revolution. Marcus's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his gaze. Understanding, maybe. Or recognition that they'd reached the point where rules stopped mattering. Tell me. So she did. Laid out the full plan, not the careful legal strategy they'd built. Something rawer, more desperate. A gambit that would either restore her to power or destroy them all. When she finished, Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then, this could start a civil war. It already started. Evelyn's voice was iron. The moment Lucien tried to murder me, the moment they forged that annulment, the moment someone decided protecting corruption mattered more than justice. I'm just making it visible. And if we lose, then we lose. But we lose fighting, not hiding, not compromising. She held his gaze. Are you with me? Marcus's jaw set. He'd been a soldier for 40 years, had survived campaigns that killed better men, had learned that sometimes the only way forward was through blood and fire, that sometimes the moral choice was also the suicidal one. Until the end, he said. Good. Evelyn turned toward the hall. Then let's give them a show they'll never forget. The doors opened at noon. The crowd flooded in. Nobles in their finest, merchants dressed to impress, common citizens who'd fought for the limited public seating. The noise was deafening, excitement and tension mixing into something electric. The hall had been arranged like a trial chamber, raised platform for judges, witness stand, defendant's box where Lucien would sit, gallery for spectators, everything formal and proper and designed to make this look like justice. Evelyn hated it, hated the pretense, the performance, the idea that you could package betrayal and murder into neat legal categories and present them for polite judgment. But she played along, took her seat in the accuser's section, wore a simple black dress, hair pulled back, no crown, no royal regalia. Just a woman seeking justice for crimes committed against her. Lucien was brought in under guard. He wore prison clothes. No crown, no royal colors. They'd stripped him of symbols, but he still carried himself like a king, back straight, head high, face carefully neutral. Their eyes met across the hall. Held. She saw calculation there, confidence. He thought he knew how this would play, thought he'd prepared for every move she could make. He was wrong about that too. Celeste was brought in next. She looked worse, hair tangled, dress rumpled, fear naked on her face. She'd spent days in a cell realizing that her plans had collapsed, that the power she'd cultivated was worthless now, that the man she'd helped murder a queen for wasn't going to save her. The judges entered last. 3 magistrates selected by the council, neutral parties supposedly. Though Evelyn had done her research, 2 were financially tied to nobles who'd benefited from Celeste's corruption. The 3rd had been appointed by Lucien himself. The trial was rigged before it started. Of course it was. That was how power worked. The powerful protected each other because they understood that justice was a threat to everyone at the top. Serafina would have worked within that system, would have believed she could prove truth so overwhelming that even corrupt judges couldn't ignore it. Evelyn knew better. The head magistrate called the hall to order. Read the charges: conspiracy to commit murder, embezzlement, abuse of royal authority, each one carrying potential death sentence. Then he invited the prosecution to present evidence. Marcus stood, moved to the center floor. He looked every inch the decorated general, medals gleaming, uniform perfect, voice carrying authority earned through decades of command. He presented the case methodically. Documents showing Celeste's embezzlement, testimony from Helena Cross detailing the conspiracy, financial records proving corruption, letters in Celeste's own hand ordering the silencing of witnesses. It was damning, comprehensive. The crowd murmured and gasped. Reporters scribbled furiously, but the judges looked bored. They asked minimal questions, made notes that were clearly performative. They'd decided the outcome before the trial began, would rule that evidence was circumstantial, that testimony was coerced, that the case didn't meet the burden of proof. Evelyn watched and felt her rage crystallize into something colder, harder. She'd known this would happen, had planned for it, but seeing it unfold in real time still made her want to burn the building down. Marcus finished his presentation, returned to his seat. The crowd buzzed with energy, convinced they'd just witnessed proof of monstrous crimes. Then Lucien's defense began. His attorney was skilled, expensive. He picked apart every piece of evidence with surgical precision, questioned every witness's credibility, suggested alternative explanations for damning documents, claimed Celeste had acted alone, that the king had been deceived by a clever woman. that Lucienne was a victim too. It was masterful, disgusting, and effective. The judges leaned forward now, engaged, asking leading questions that helped the defense, creating reasonable doubt where none should exist. The afternoon dragged on. Witness after witness, document after document, the truth being slowly suffocated under layers of legal maneuvering and judicial corruption. By evening, it was clear how this would end. The judges would rule that evidence was insufficient. Celeste might face minor charges. Lucienne would be exonerated. The empire would move on. Business as usual. Evelyn sat through it all, silent, still, waiting. When the prosecution rested, the head magistrate called for final statements. Marcus stood to deliver the summary they'd prepared. The passionate appeal to justice, the reminder of Serafina's sacrifice, the demand for accountability. Evelyn stood instead. The hall went quiet. Everyone staring. Marcus froze mid-step. The judges frowned. This wasn't procedure. The accused had no right to address the court directly. Evelyn didn't care. She walked to the center floor. Her boots echoed on stone. She felt the weight of 1,000 eyes, felt the moment balanced on a razor edge. When she spoke, her voice carried to every corner of the massive hall. No hesitation, no doubt. The voice of a woman who'd decided that survival required burning every bridge behind her. This trial is a performance. She gestured at the judges. Those 3 men have already decided to protect the king. They'll rule that evidence is insufficient, that crimes weren't proven, that corruption and murder can be explained away with clever arguments and legal technicalities. Your Majesty, the head magistrate interrupted, you're out of order. Sit down or be removed. I'm not finished. Evelyn's eyes swept the crowd. You want to know why I faked my death? Why I spent months gathering evidence? Why I returned to expose the man who tried to kill me? She pointed at Lucian. Because I believed in justice. Believed that truth mattered. That a kingdom built on law would protect the innocent and punish the guilty. She laughed. Bitter. Raw. I was wrong. This system isn't designed for justice. It's designed to protect power. To ensure that kings who murder their wives face no consequences. That nobles who steal from orphans and veterans walk free. That corruption flourishes because everyone at the top benefits from it. Her voice rose. So I'm done playing by rules that only apply to the powerless. Guards, the magistrate snapped. Remove her now. Marcus's soldiers moved to block the guards. Steel rang as blades were drawn. The crowd gasped. Suddenly, this wasn't a trial anymore. It was something far more dangerous. What are you doing? Lucian was on his feet, face pale, finally understanding that he'd miscalculated catastrophically, giving the people a choice. Evelyn pulled a folded document from her coat. This is testimony from 12 members of the Royal Council. Sealed confessions detailing how Lucian systematically looted the treasury, how he approved Celeste's embezzlement in exchange for political support, how he knowingly allowed veterans to starve while enriching his allies. She held it high. This is proof your judges were paid to rule in his favor. Proof this trial was theater designed to maintain the illusion of justice while protecting the guilty. The crowd erupted. Shouts, accusations, people surging forward, the guards trying to maintain order. She's lying, Celeste shrieked. She's a traitor spreading... I'm the queen you tried to murder. Evelyn's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. I'm the woman who jumped into a river rather than die on your schedule, who survived and planned and returned to show this empire what its leaders really are. She turned to face the crowd. Corrupt, cruel, willing to destroy anything that threatens their power. She threw the document to the crowd. Let them see it. Let them read every word. Let them know their leaders are thieves and murderers. Hands grabbed for the papers, passing them back, reading aloud. The accusations spreading like wildfire. This is sedition, the head magistrate was shouting. Guards, arrest everyone involved. Restore order. But the guards weren't moving. Half were loyal to Marcus. The other half were looking at the crowd, at the Fury building, at the realization that they were outnumbered 100-1 by people who'd just learned their king was a fraud. Lucian saw it too, saw the trial dissolving into chaos, saw control slipping away, saw the future collapsing into revolution. Stop this, he said to Evelyn. His voice was desperate now. You'll destroy the kingdom. Everything we built, everything Serafina believed in. Serafina believed in a kingdom worth saving. Evelyn stepped closer. You murdered that kingdom when you murdered her. What's left isn't worth protecting. She raised her voice again. To the crowd, you have a choice. Accept this corrupt system. Let these judges rule that murder and theft are acceptable if committed by kings. Go home and let nothing change. She paused. Let the moment stretch. Or stand up. Demand real justice. Tear down a system that protects criminals and rebuild something better. Something where law applies equally to kings and commoners. Where truth matters more than power. The crowd roared. Not all of them, but enough. Veterans who'd watched their benefits disappear. Merchants tired of corrupt tariffs. Common citizens who'd lost everything while nobles grew fat. The sound was terrifying. Beautiful. The sound of order breaking, of revolution igniting, of people who'd been powerless suddenly remembering they outnumbered their oppressors. Marcus moved to Evelyn's side. His soldiers formed a protective ring, blades drawn, ready for the violence that was about to erupt. What now? He asked quietly. Now we see if I just freed a kingdom or started a civil war. Evelyn's hands weren't shaking, weren't trembling. They were steady, with the certainty of someone who'd passed beyond fear into pure commitment. Someone who'd learned that the most dangerous people were those with nothing left to lose. That power came not from crowns or thrones, but from the willingness to burn everything down rather than accept injustice. The magistrates were fleeing, pushing through crowds toward exits. The judges who'd planned to protect Lucian now running for their lives. Guards were fighting each other, some defending the old order, some joining the revolution. Celeste tried to run, got 3 steps before a veteran grabbed her. Dozens of hands pulled her back. She disappeared into the crowd, screaming. Lucien stood alone in the defendant's box, watching his empire collapse in real time, watching the woman he'd tried to kill destroy everything he'd built, not with evidence or law, with rage, with the fury of thousands who'd been betrayed. He looked at Evelyn, really looked at her, saw not the wife he'd married or the queen he'd murdered, saw something harder, something forged in drowning and months of calculated revenge, something that understood power better than he ever had. You won, he said quietly. Under the roar of the crowd, you destroyed me. No. Evelyn's voice was cold. I destroyed the lie you built. You destroyed yourself when you chose corruption over duty. When you traded love for ambition. When you forgot that crowns are temporary but consequences are forever. She gestured to Marcus's soldiers. They moved forward, grabbed Lucy, and dragged him from the box even as he struggled. Where are you taking me? His composure finally cracking, fear naked on his face. Somewhere you can't hurt anyone else. Evelyn turned away. She was done looking at him, done caring what happened to the man he'd become. The trial is over, but justice hasn't even started. The hall was chaos now, people flooding toward exits, soldiers fighting, nobles trying to escape, the old order collapsing into violence and fury. Marcus leaned close. We need to move. Get you somewhere defensible. This is going to spread. The whole capital will be burning by midnight. Good. Let it burn. Evelyn started walking. Let them see what happens when corruption goes too far. When the powerful push the powerless past the breaking point. She looked back at the hall one last time. At the trial that had become a revolution. At the system she'd just shattered. Sometimes destruction is the only path to justice. Sometimes you can't reform what's rotten. You can only tear it down and build something new from the ashes. They moved through corridors. Marcus's soldiers clearing the path. Behind them, the sound of the riot spreading, glass shattering, people shouting. The capital realizing that everything had just changed. Evelyn felt nothing. No satisfaction, no regret. Just cold certainty. She'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Had chosen chaos over order, revolution over compromise. Had burned every bridge and bet everything on the hope that what rose from the ashes would be better than what she'd destroyed. She didn't know if she'd made the right choice. Wasn't sure there was a right choice. Just knew that she'd made the only choice she could live with, that Serafina would have compromised and lost, that Evelyn had gambled everything and now they'd all see if she won or just destroyed them all equally. They reached the palace. Marcus's soldiers had seized control. Loyal guards held the gates, but beyond the walls the capital was erupting, fires starting, crowds gathering, the revolution she'd ignited spreading through streets like plague. Your Majesty, Marcus said. His face was grim. What are your orders? Evelyn looked out at the burning city, at the empire tearing itself apart, at the chaos she'd unleashed because she'd decided that a corrupt peace was worse than righteous war. We hold the palace, she said. We protect the loyal. We let the fire burn until there's nothing left of the old system. She turned to face him. And then we see if a kingdom can be rebuilt by people who understand that power without accountability is just tyranny with a crown. The night stretched ahead, long, violent, uncertain. The trial had been meant to expose criminals. Instead, it had exposed a system so broken that violence was the only language it understood. Justice wasn't possible through law when law itself was corrupted, so she'd chosen something older, rawer, more honest. She'd chosen war. The question now wasn't whether she'd won the trial, it was whether she'd survived the revolution, whether the kingdom would survive, whether anything worth saving would emerge from the chaos. Evelyn stood on the palace walls and watched her empire burn, watched fire spread through districts, watched crowds pulling down statues of corrupt officials, watched the old order dying in flames and fury. And somewhere in her chest, the ghost of Seraphina Vale whispered that this wasn't the answer, that violence would only breed more violence, that destroying the system would create worse chaos than reforming it. But Evelyn wasn't listening to ghosts anymore. She'd drowned that voice in a river months ago, had learned that sometimes the only path forward required breaking everything first, that you couldn't build something new while clinging to rotted foundations. So she watched the fires burn and waited to see what would be left when morning came. Behind her, Marcus was coordinating defenses, deploying soldiers, preparing for the siege that would inevitably come. Forces loyal to Lucian regrouping, foreign powers sensing opportunity, the empire fracturing into factions that would fight for control of what remained. Civil war. Just like Marcus had warned, just like she'd known was possible, just like she'd chosen anyway because the alternative was living under a system that protected murderers and thieves. The fires burned brighter, the screaming grew louder. The revolution she'd started consumed the capital with mindless fury, and Evelyn stood at the center of it all. No longer a queen, no longer even Seraphina Vale or Evelyn Duval. Just a woman who'd survived drowning by learning to breathe fire, who'd traded justice for vengeance and order for chaos because she'd been pushed past the point where compromise was possible. She'd destroyed a king, shattered a kingdom, started a war. Now she just had to survive it. The night ahead would determine everything, whether she'd liberated an empire or doomed it, whether she was a hero or a monster, whether the woman who'd crawled out of a river months ago had saved anything worth saving or just spread her own drowning to everyone around her. The answer waited in the flames, in the chaos. In the morning that might never come if the revolution consumed everything first, Evelyn watched and waited and prepared for war, because she'd learned the hardest truth of all, that sometimes surviving meant becoming the monster, that sometimes justice required destruction, that sometimes the only way to save a kingdom was to burn it down and pray something better grew from the ashes. The trial was over, the war was just beginning, and the woman who'd been a queen was about to discover if she had the strength to become whatever came next. The fires burned for 3 days. Evelyn watched from the palace walls as the capital tore itself apart. Crowds attacking noble estates, looters smashing merchant storefronts, soldiers fighting soldiers in streets that ran red with blood. The revolution she'd ignited had become something wild and mindless, a beast that consumed everything without discrimination. This was the price of destruction, the cost of choosing chaos over compromise. She'd known it was possible, had gambled that the empire would survive the purging fire. Now she stood in the smoke and ash and wondered if she'd miscalculated fatally. Marcus joined her at dawn on the 4th day. His armor was stained with soot and blood. He'd been fighting through the night, defending the palace against mobs that wanted to burn everything royal, against opportunists who saw revolution as license for murder. "We can't hold much longer," he said quietly. His voice was hoarse from smoke. "The outer districts have fallen to complete anarchy. The merchant quarter is burning. Half the noble houses have been sacked. If we don't restore order soon, there won't be a kingdom left to save." Evelyn knew he was right. The revolution had accomplished its purpose. The corrupt system was broken. Lucien was imprisoned. Celeste's network was shattered. Justice had been served in the rawest possible form. But justice without mercy was just another kind of tyranny. Destruction without rebuilding was just nihilism. She'd torn down the old order. Now she had to prove something better could rise from the ashes. Had to show that the woman who'd survived drowning could also breathe life into something new. The question was whether she still had the strength, whether months of rage and calculation had left anything inside her capable of rebuilding, whether the ghost of Seraphina Vale had anything left to offer the woman Evelyn had become. "Gather the council," she said. "Everyone still alive and loyal, every faction leader who will come, every merchant prince and guildmaster and officer who wants to see this city survive. We meet at noon in the throne room." Marcus studied her face. "What are you planning?" "To do what Seraphina should have done from the start." Evelyn's voice was tired. "Admit that the old system failed, that corruption destroyed it from within, and that the only path forward requires everyone to surrender power they think they've earned." She looked at him. "Including me." The throne room at noon was half empty. Many nobles were dead, others had fled the capital. The remaining faces were hard, angry, frightened. These were people who'd lost everything in the chaos, who blamed Evelyn for unleashing destruction they couldn't control. She didn't wear a crown, didn't sit on the throne, just stood at the center of the floor in simple black dress. No guards flanking her, no symbols of power, just a woman who'd survived drowning and revolution and now faced the hardest test of all, rebuilding trust from rubble and ashes. "This kingdom is dying," she began. No preamble, no royal formality, just blunt truth. The fires burning outside are proof. The bodies in the streets are proof. The fact that half of you want me dead is proof. She met their eyes one by one. "I broke the system. I started this war. And now I'm asking you to help me end it. Why should we?" A merchant lord named Garrett stood. His face was bruised, clothes torn. "You destroyed everything, unleashed mobs that murdered innocent people, burned homes and businesses that had nothing to do with royal corruption. You're as guilty as Lucian." "You're right." Evelyn didn't flinch. "I chose destruction over reform. I gambled that the empire would survive the purge. I was wrong about the cost, about how much blood would spill, about how quickly chaos would consume everything." She paused. "But I wasn't wrong about the corruption, about the system being rotten beyond saving, about the need for something better." Pretty words from a woman who's safe behind palace walls while the city burns. A guildmaster named Petra spoke. Her voice was bitter. "You want to rebuild? Start by facing justice for the violence you caused. Then try me." Evelyn spread her arms. "Arrest me, execute me if that's what you decide. But first, help me stop the fires. Help me restore order. Help me prove that this empire can be more than just endless cycles of corruption and revolution." She stepped forward. "I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to trust yourselves, to believe you can build something better without needing a queen or king to tell you how." The room was silent. These were people who'd spent their lives under royal authority, who'd been taught that power flowed from the throne downward. The common citizens needed rulers to maintain order. Evelyn was proposing something radical, something that terrified them as much as the fires outside. "What exactly are you suggesting?" a retired general named Helena asked carefully. "A council." Evelyn's voice strengthened. "Not advisory, not subservient to a crown, an actual governing body with real authority. Representatives from every district, every guild, every military division, people who answer to the citizens who elected them, not to royal decree." "That's chaos," Garrett said. "Mob rule. It'll never work." "As opposed to the working system we had before?" Evelyn's tone was sharp. "Where kings could murder wives without consequence, where nobles embezzled from veterans and orphans, where corruption was so endemic that revolution was the only language anyone understood." She shook her head. "That system failed. We need something new, something where power is distributed, where no single person can destroy everything because they're above the law." "And what happens to you?" Petra asked. "In this new system, do you just fade into obscurity after burning down an empire?" Evelyn had thought about this constantly, through the nights of fire and blood, through the weight of responsibility for thousands dead, through the understanding that power was both seductive and poisonous, that the woman who'd fought so hard to reclaim a throne might need to surrender it completely to prove anything had actually changed. "I abdicate," she said quietly. The words cost her everything. "I step down. No crown, no throne, no royal authority. I become a citizen like anyone else, subject to the same laws, facing the same consequences. The room erupted. Shock, disbelief, arguments breaking out about what that meant, about whether it was surrender or strategy, about whether the empire could survive without a monarch. Marcus moved to her side. His voice was low. Are you certain? Once you give up the crown, you can't take it back. And there are people who'll demand your execution for the chaos you caused. I know. Evelyn looked at him. The general who'd been loyal when everyone else betrayed her, who'd stood beside her through drowning and revenge and revolution. But this was always the endgame, not to replace one ruler with another, to break the cycle completely. She managed a tired smile. Besides, I'm done being queen. Serafina died in that river. Eveline Duval was always temporary. Maybe it's time to find out who I actually am without a crown or a mission or a war to fight. The debate raged for hours. Arguments about structure, about representation, about how to transition from monarchy to something unprecedented. Some wanted to maintain a figurehead ruler. Others wanted complete democracy. Everyone had opinions. Everyone fought passionately. It was messy, inefficient, frustrating. It was also progress. These people weren't waiting for royal decree. They were negotiating, compromising, building consensus, learning in real time how to govern themselves. By evening, they'd hammered out a framework. Not perfect, barely functional, but a start. A provisional council would govern during the transition. Elections would be held within 6 months. A constitution would be drafted establishing laws that applied equally to everyone. No exceptions, no privileges for birth or wealth. And Serafina Vale would abdicate immediately, would face trial for her role in the violence, would submit to whatever judgment the new system rendered. The formal ceremony happened at sunset. What remained of the noble houses gathered. Common citizens were allowed entry for the first time in the throne room's history. Marcus stood witness. The provisional council members lined the walls. Evelyn wore the crown one last time. The weight was familiar. Once it had meant duty and sacrifice. Then it had meant stolen authority. Now it just felt heavy, a burden she'd carried too long, a symbol of power she no longer wanted. She stood before the throne and spoke words she'd written herself. I claim this crown through blood and birth and law. I reclaim it through survival and struggle and justice. And now I surrender it because I've learned that crowns don't make kingdoms strong. People do. She removed the crown, held it for a moment, felt the weight of 12 years as queen, months as a ghost, days as a revolutionary. And I've learned that power without accountability is just another word for tyranny. That change doesn't come from enlightened rulers. It comes from people brave enough to demand something better. She set the crown on the throne, stepped back, felt something break inside her that might have been relief or grief or both. I abdicate. Evelyn's voice carried to every corner. No more Queen Serafina. No more royal authority. Just a citizen subject to the law like everyone else. She looked at the council. Judge me as you would anyone. Hold me accountable for my choices. For the violence I caused. For the lives lost in pursuit of justice. She paused, and then decide if this empire can be something worth saving. The room was silent, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone. An empire without a monarch, a kingdom trying to become something unprecedented, a woman who'd fought so hard for power now surrendering it completely. The head counselor stepped forward, a woman named Marin who'd lost her son in the riots. Her face was hard, her voice harder. Serafina Vale, you are charged with inciting violence that resulted in hundreds of deaths, with destroying property, with causing chaos that threatens the empire's survival. How do you plead? Guilty. Evelyn didn't hesitate. Of all charges, I chose destruction. I'm responsible for the consequences. Marin studied her. Then, you'll stand trial. The council will determine your fate. Until then, you're confined to the palace under guard. No privileges. No special treatment. She paused. And if you're found guilty of crimes worthy of execution, you'll face the same justice as any citizen. I understand. Evelyn felt Marcus tense beside her, felt the weight of consequences finally catching up. She'd survived drowning, survived months of revenge, survived revolution. Now she had to survive accountability. It was almost a relief. The trial took 2 weeks, evidence presented in the same hall where she'd destroyed Lucian. Witnesses testifying about the violence, about loved ones killed in riots, about homes and businesses burned, about the chaos that had consumed the capital. Eveline didn't defend herself, didn't make excuses, just acknowledged every accusation, admitted her role in every death, accepted responsibility for choosing destruction over compromise. The prosecution wanted execution, called her a murderer who'd killed more people than Lucien ever had, who'd destroyed an empire because of personal vendetta, who deserved the harshest possible justice. The defense argued mitigation, reminded the council of the corruption she'd exposed, of the system that had forced her into impossible choices, of the fact that reform had been impossible without breaking everything first. Both sides had truth. That was the hardest part. There were no clean answers, no simple justice, just complexity and consequences and the understanding that sometimes even righteous causes produced monstrous outcomes. The council deliberated for 3 days. When they returned, Marin's face was unreadable. "We find you guilty," she said, "of inciting violence, of causing deaths through reckless action, of choosing destruction when other paths existed." The words fell like stones. "But we also acknowledge the impossible situation you faced, the corruption that made legal reform impossible, the betrayal that pushed you past breaking." "So what's the sentence?" Eveline asked. Her voice was steady. She'd prepared for execution, had made peace with dying if that's what justice required. 10 years exile, Marin said. "You leave the capital immediately. You're forbidden from holding any position of authority, from participating in governance, from returning to the empire for a decade." She paused. "If you return before that time, you'll be executed. No trial, no appeal." It was mercy. Harsh mercy. But mercy nonetheless. Eveline felt something crack in her chest. Relief, maybe. Or loss. She'd fought so hard to reclaim the empire. Now she was being cast out of it. But she'd survived. That's what she did. Survived drowning. Survived betrayal. Survived revolution. Now she'd survive exile. "I accept the sentence," she said. "One more thing." Marin's expression softened slightly. "You asked what happened to Lucien, what judgment we rendered." Eveline had almost forgotten. The man who'd started everything, who'd tried to murder her, who'd corrupted the kingdom she'd loved. "He was tried separately," Marin continued. "Found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, of embezzlement, of abuse of authority. The evidence you gathered was sufficient, damning. And life imprisonment." Marin's voice was flat. "No execution, despite many calling for it. We decided that executing deposed rulers sets bad precedent, makes every transition of power a potential death sentence. So he lives. In a cell. Stripped of everything. Forced to watch the kingdom he corrupted become something better without him. It was fitting. Worse than death, maybe. Living with failure, with betrayal exposed, with the understanding that the wife he'd tried to kill had survived and destroyed him completely. Eveline felt nothing looking at Marin. No satisfaction, no triumph, just exhaustion. The kind that came from fighting too long, from winning battles but losing pieces of yourself along the way, from discovering that justice was messier and more painful than stories ever admitted. "And Celeste?" she asked. "Executed," Marin said shortly, "for corruption, for conspiracy, for the blood on her hands." The council was less merciful there. Eveline nodded. She should have felt something, vindication maybe, but she just felt tired. The exile began immediately. They gave her a horse, supplies for a month, a pouch of coins, nothing else. No guards, no ceremony. Just a woman riding out of the capital at dawn while the city slowly rebuilt from ashes. Marcus met her at the gates. His face was lined with grief. "I could come with you," he offered. "Guard your back. Make sure you reach wherever you're going." "No." Eveline managed to smile. "You're needed here to make sure this new system survives, to be the steady hand that keeps everything from collapsing again." She reached out, gripped his shoulder. "You were loyal when no one else was. You stood beside me through drowning and revenge and revolution. That's enough, more than enough. What will you do?" Marcus's voice was rough. "Where will you go?" "I don't know." Eveline looked out at the horizon, dawn breaking over hills she'd never traveled. Maybe north. Maybe across the sea. Somewhere I can figure out who I am without being queen or ghost or revolutionary. She turned back to him. Somewhere I can learn to live with what I've done, with the price I paid, with the woman I became. You saved the kingdom, Marcus said fiercely, exposed corruption, created the possibility of something better. I started a war that killed hundreds. Evelyn's voice was quiet. I chose destruction over mercy. I became exactly what I was fighting against, someone who decided the ends justified any means. She shook her head. That's not saving. That's just replacing one monster with another who happens to have better justifications. Then what was it all for? If not justice? If not saving the kingdom? Survival. Evelyn's smile was sad. That's all it ever was. I survived drowning by learning to stop being the woman who could drown. Survived betrayal by becoming harder than the people who betrayed me. Survived revolution by accepting that sometimes you have to burn everything to create space for something new. She met his eyes. But surviving isn't the same as winning, and sometimes the cost of survival is becoming someone you don't recognize. She urged her horse forward, rode through gates that closed behind her with finality, the capital growing distant, the empire she'd fought so hard for fading into memory. She rode for days, through forests and villages, past farms where people were rebuilding, past towns where news of the revolution was still spreading, past borders into territories she'd only seen on maps. Everywhere she went, people were talking about what had happened, about the dead queen who'd returned, about the trial that became revolution, about the empire trying to become something unprecedented. Some praised her, called her a hero. Others cursed her name, blamed her for the chaos. Both were right. That was the truth she carried now, that justice and destruction could coexist, that good intentions could produce monstrous outcomes, that sometimes the people who changed the world were also the ones who broke it irreparably. She stopped in a coastal town 2 months into her exile, small fishing village where nobody recognized her, where she could rent a room above a tavern and watch the ocean and try to figure out what came next. The ocean reminded her of drowning, of the river that had killed Serafina Vale, of the choice to jump rather than die on someone else's schedule. She'd survived by refusing to accept the death they'd planned, by becoming something harder and colder and more ruthless. But now that survival was over, the war was won, the revolution finished. She had nothing left to fight, no mission, no identity beyond the woman who'd destroyed an empire to save it. She spent her days walking the beach, watching waves, thinking about everything that had happened, about Lucien and Celeste and the trial, about Marcus and Helena and all the people who died for her choices, about whether any of it had been worth the cost. The owner of the tavern was an older woman named Iris. She didn't ask questions, just served food and collected rent and left Evelyn alone. Until one night when Evelyn was sitting in the common room, staring at wine she wasn't drinking. "You've got that look?" Iris said, sitting down uninvited. Like someone who survived something that should have killed them, like someone who's trying to figure out if survival was worth it. Evelyn glanced at her, said nothing. "I had that look once," Iris continued, "after my husband died, after I lost everything and had to start over. Spent years wondering if I should have just died with him, if survival was cowardice instead of strength." "What changed?" Evelyn heard herself ask. "I realized survival is just the beginning." Iris's voice was gentle. "The hard part is figuring out what you're surviving for, what you're going to build with the life you fought so hard to keep. And if you can't figure that out, then you just exist, breathing but not living, surviving but not thriving." Iris stood, patted Evelyn's shoulder. "But you don't strike me as someone who's content to just exist. You survive for a reason. Eventually you'll figure out what it is." The words stayed with Evelyn through the following weeks, dug into her consciousness like hooks. She'd survived drowning, survived betrayal, survived revolution. But to what end? To live out exile in a fishing village? To hide from the consequences of her choices? To just exist until her 10 years were up? That wasn't survival. That was just slow death. She started helping around the village, small things at first, fixing fishing nets, helping repair storm damage, teaching children to read. Nothing grand, nothing heroic, just being useful, contributing, building instead of destroying. It was harder than revolution, harder than revenge. Building required patience, humility, the willingness to create something knowing it might fail, knowing you might fail, knowing that success wasn't glorious or definitive, but just slow accumulation of small improvements. Months passed. The village started to feel like home. The people stopped seeing her as a stranger and started seeing her as one of them. Someone who worked hard, who kept her word, who helped when help was needed. One afternoon, a merchant ship arrived with news from the capital. The new council was functioning. Not perfectly, but functioning. Elections had been held, representatives chosen, laws being drafted, the empire slowly becoming something unprecedented, something better. Lucien was still imprisoned, alive but broken, watching from his cell as everything he'd corrupted became something he couldn't control. The system Evelyn had destroyed was being replaced, not with perfect justice, not with utopia, just with something more accountable, more transparent, more human. It was working, messily, imperfectly, but working. Evelyn sat on the beach that evening and watched the sun set over the ocean, felt something settle in her chest that might have been peace, or acceptance, or just exhaustion finally giving way to something gentler. She'd destroyed an empire, started a revolution, killed hundreds pursuing justice. The cost had been catastrophic, the methods brutal, the consequences still unfolding, but something better was rising from the ashes. Not because of her, because of the people brave enough to try building instead of just surviving. People who'd taken the space she'd created through destruction and filled it with something worth protecting. Maybe that was enough. Maybe justice wasn't about perfect outcomes. Maybe it was about creating possibility, about breaking systems so broken they couldn't be reformed, about accepting that sometimes the people who started revolutions weren't the ones who should finish them. She thought about Serafina, the queen who'd believed in duty and honor and sacrifice, who'd tried so hard to be perfect, to save everyone, to fix everything. That woman had been naive, beautiful, worth loving, worth mourning, but she couldn't have survived what came after, couldn't have made the brutal choices survival demanded, couldn't have become hard enough to break an empire or ruthless enough to start a war. Evelyn had survived by becoming something Serafina never could, something colder, harder, more willing to accept terrible costs for necessary outcomes. She'd lost pieces of herself doing it, lost the woman who jumped into a river believing justice was simple and righteousness was enough. But she'd gained something too, understanding maybe, of how fragile power was, how easily corruption spread, how sometimes destruction was mercy, how the difference between hero and monster was often just perspective and timing. She was both, hero and monster, savior and destroyer, the woman who'd exposed corruption and the woman who'd killed hundreds doing it, the queen who'd been betrayed and the revolutionary who'd burned an empire. All of it true, all of it her. Living with that complexity was harder than drowning, harder than revenge, harder than revolution. But it was also more honest, more real, more human than the simple stories people told themselves about good and evil. Iris found her on the beach at twilight. "You've got that look again," the older woman said. "But different this time." "How so?" "Like you've figured something out, like you've decided surviving was worth it after all." Evelyn smiled, tired, genuine. "Maybe. Or maybe I've just accepted that I don't get to know, that the empire will become whatever it becomes, that my role was breaking the old system, not building the new one." "That's wisdom," Iris said, "knowing when your part is finished, when it's time to let go and let others carry the weight." They stood together watching the ocean, the waves endless and patient, breaking against shore and returning and breaking again, constant, inevitable, indifferent to human drama. "What will you do?" Iris asked. "When your exile ends, return to the capital?" Evelyn thought about it, about the empire she'd fought for, the throne she'd surrendered, the crown she'd worn and discarded, about whether the woman who'd been queen could ever be anything else. "No," she said finally. "That life is over. That woman is dead. I drowned her in a river and she's not coming back." She looked at Iris. "But maybe whoever I am now can build something here. Something small. Something that helps people without requiring them to burn down empires first." "That sounds nice," Iris said. "Peaceful." "It does." Evelyn's voice was soft. "And after everything, maybe peaceful is enough." The years passed slowly, quietly. Evelyn built a life in the fishing village that had nothing to do with crowns or thrones or revolutions. She helped build a school, organized a lending library, taught children to read and adults to negotiate better prices with merchants. Small victories, unglamorous, the kind of change that took years to notice. News from the capital came irregularly. The new system was surviving, growing pains and setbacks, but surviving. The council was learning to govern. The people were learning to hold them accountable. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. Lucienne died in prison 5 years into Eveline's exile. She heard about it from a traveling merchant. The news should have meant something, closure maybe. But she just felt empty. The man who'd betrayed her was gone. The revenge was complete. But it didn't change anything, didn't heal anything, just closed a chapter that should have ended differently. Marcus visited once, 7 years into her exile. He looked older, gray in his beard, lines around his eyes, but strong, vital. A man who'd found purpose rebuilding what had been broken. They walked the beach together, talking about the empire, about the changes, about the people who'd died and the people who'd survived. "Do you regret it?" Marcus asked. "Everything that happened? The choices you made?" Evelyn thought about it, really thought. About drowning and survival and revolution, about the woman she'd been and the woman she'd become, about the cost and the consequences and whether any of it had been worth it. "Every day," she said finally, "and not at all, both at once." She looked at him. "I regret the people who died, the violence I caused, the brutality I chose. But I don't regret exposing the corruption. Don't regret fighting when fighting was the only option. Don't regret surviving when they tried to kill me." She smiled sadly. "Maybe that makes me a monster. Maybe it makes me human. I'm not sure there's a difference." "You're not a monster," Marcus said firmly. "You're someone who made impossible choices in impossible circumstances, who paid a terrible price for doing what you believed was right." "Belief doesn't make things right." Evelyn's voice was quiet. "It just makes them easier to justify. That's what I learned. That conviction can be as dangerous as corruption. That certainty kills as surely as treachery." She looked out at the ocean. Maybe the only wisdom is knowing we're all capable of both. Hero and monster, savior and destroyer. That the line between them is thinner than anyone wants to admit. They stood in silence. Two people who'd survived a revolution and carried the scars. Who'd learned that justice was messier than stories admitted. That change required sacrifice. That sometimes even necessary destruction left wounds that never fully healed. "The Empire is grateful," Marcus said, "even if they can't admit it. Even if your name is complicated now. What you started changed everything. Then let them be grateful to someone else." Evelyn turned away from the ocean. "I'm done being queen or ghost or revolutionary. I'm just Evelyn now. Just a woman trying to figure out how to live with what she's done. How to build something instead of destroying. How to be someone worth being." "That's enough," Marcus said. "More than enough." He left the next morning, rode back to the capital where he was needed, where the work of rebuilding continued, where the empire was becoming something unprecedented, something better. Evelyn watched him go and felt something settle, peace maybe, or just acceptance that her part was finished, that history would judge her how it judged her, that she'd lived and fought and survived, and that was all anyone could do. On the 10th anniversary of her exile, a messenger arrived, official document from the council. Her sentence was complete. She was free to return to the capital if she wished, free to reclaim citizenship, free to participate in the system she'd helped create. Evelyn read the document 3 times, felt the weight of possibility. She could return, could see what the empire had become, could maybe find some role in the system that had risen from ashes. But she didn't. She sent a letter back thanking the council, declining the invitation, choosing to stay where she'd built something small and real, and hers. Because the woman who'd been queen was dead, drowned in a river, burned in revolution, buried in exile. What remained was just Evelyn, someone who'd survived by becoming someone new. Someone who'd learned that power was poison and justice was complicated and survival meant accepting both hero and monster lived in the same skin. She stood on the beach where she'd spent 10 years rebuilding herself, watched the waves break and return and break again. Endless, patient, indifferent, And she understood finally what survival had been for. Not to reclaim power, not to rule, not to be remembered as hero or martyr or anything else. Just to live. Imperfectly. Honestly. With full knowledge of what she'd done and what she'd become. To build something small instead of destroying something large. To choose peace over glory. To be human instead of legend. That was the real victory. Not the revolution. Not the justice. Just the quiet choice to keep living even after everything that should have broken her. To keep building even knowing everything could burn. To keep trying even understanding she'd never be perfect or pure or anything other than complicated and scarred and human. She turned away from the ocean, walked back toward the village, toward the school she'd helped build, toward the library she maintained, toward the small, unglamorous life she'd constructed from the ruins of empire and vengeance and drowning. And for the first time since she'd jumped into the Ashfall River, Evelyn felt something like contentment. Not happiness, not peace, just the quiet understanding that she'd survived. That survival was enough. That the woman who'd been queen had become someone better by learning to be no one special at all. The Empire would remember Seraphina Vale, the queen who'd been betrayed, who'd returned from death, who'd started a revolution. History would debate her choices, judge her methods, argue whether she'd been hero or monster or something in between. But history didn't matter to the woman walking through a fishing village at sunset. Didn't matter to Evelyn, who'd learned that legacy was just another prison, that the only freedom was letting go of being remembered at all. She'd survived drowning, survived betrayal, survived revolution and exile and the terrible weight of consequences. And now she'd survived the hardest test of all, learning to live without needing to be anything more than human. That was enough. It had to be. It was all she had left. And maybe, just maybe, it was all she'd ever really needed.